watching the St. Louis Cardinals. Because as I watched, and Luken Baker hits a pinch hit home run, and Jose Fermin gets into the game, goes 1 for 1 with a walk and scores 2 runs in it and helps you win the game. It allows for flexibility with the way that you're utilizing your lineup. My primary thought was, why did they have to wait so long to do this? Why did it take them so long to make moves that might work out? The odds of Luken Baker being a contributor for the next 6 weeks, extremely low. I don't think that's in the range of outcomes for him. The odds of Jose Fermin being a significant contributor in a winning way for this Cardinals team down the stretch, very low. But wasn't it worth it to find out? Wasn't it worth it to shake this thing up to see, hey, our playoff life depends on us going out there and making a couple of moves to see if we can find a spark. Because last night, that's what they provided. Luken Baker provided you a spark when you needed it most. Jose Fermin provided you a spark and the flexibility that was necessary in that kind of a game. But instead, they decided to play with a couple of coaches in uniform. They decided to keep running this thing out there with a guy that's striking out 38% of the time. They decided to go with a guy that is a top prospect in Major League Baseball who is finally having a little bit of success and put him into a role that he was never designed to be a part of. They had to go that route instead of finding out if there was something in the minor leagues that could maybe help them a bit at the major league level. So for me, Alex, I couldn't get overly excited about a 10-6 win that they had a walk-off on, that Nolan Arenado came through finally with the big hit. That wasn't the primary emotion for me last night. My primary emotion was that of frustration as I watched these young guys finally get an opportunity to crack the lineup, get into a key spot, and came through in a big way. Why wasn't that happening 2-3 weeks ago?
You know what, BK? I'm going to defend my Cardinals a little bit here. I think they already know what both those players were. Luken Baker, you saw him last year. Wasn't anything great. Jose Fermin, who cares what he's doing in the minors? Doesn't matter. We saw him at the major league level. He's not good enough. Why give those guys a chance when we've got these other guys who aren't hitting at our major league level, i.e. Nolan Gorman and some of these other players that are playing? That was tongue-in-cheek. I appreciate that was your level of frustration because that's just the operating side of it. I had a different level of frustration with this one. And this is going to make me sound awful, but DJ Patty Cakes up on our graveyard chat is on my side with this. My first reaction when Nolan Arenado hit that home run was, you gotta be bleeping kidding me. Now we're gonna spin this tomorrow as, oh, this is the date we'll circle on the calendar where the Cardinals turn it around, and at the end of the October when we're looking back and holding a World Series over our head, we'll look back to that Milwaukee series when they walked it off against them. And I'm not gonna do that trash.
They literally. God bless Chip Carey.
I mean, you got to. You're the play-by-play man for the Bally Sports Midwest broadcast.
100%.
You got to.
And he does a really good job. I genuinely like the broadcasts. I enjoy them. But when he said last night, you look back and on May 12th against the Milwaukee Brewers, Ollie Marmol got thrown out of the game, and that was the thing that got them back on track after that 15-24 start. All I could do sitting at home, sitting next to Luca, sitting next to Kara, was think to myself, this is not that.
Well, and
this
again,
is not the same situation as that was.
The reason I had that thought process, like DJ Patty Cakes on our graveyard chat, was the Cardinals win a few more games, they get into the playoff race once again, and this roster's the exact same next year. There will be 0 changes with this team. Yes, it's frustrating when Luken Baker is hitting home runs galore in the minors and you just keep him down there and you don't bring him up and give him an opportunity. Yes, it's very frustrating when Nolan Gorman just continues to strike out and the Cardinals tell Jordan Walker, hey, you can't be this bad at the major leagues. You got to go down and work on your swing. But Nolan Gorman, you can legitimately be one of the worst hitters in the history of Major League Baseball, and just keep trying, kid. We'll get you back out there sooner or later. And Jose Fermin, who had shown you, the Cardinals got away from what they've used to do. The typical thing for the Cardinals in the middle of the season was us on the air talking about who's going to be the Cardinals' devil magic player this year that goes on a month hot stretch to help this team get in. Remember Jeremy Hazelraker?
That didn't really happen this year, did he?
No.
There was nobody.
And I don't know if there was really anybody last year that did that for you. At the end, it was Mason Wynn, but you were already out of it.
Wynn didn't even have a hot stretch, really. He kind of struggled.
I don't know if you've had a hot stretch of guys. Corey Dickerson was like the one, probably the last one. He and Brad Miller.
Donovan 2 years ago was Cardinals.
Yepes was there. I mean, they had a couple last year. It was Yepes, Donovan.
Dude, that was Gorman. 2 years ago, though.
They've gotten away from that in terms of there's somebody who's tearing it up that's not going to ever be the star you need him to be, but they'll give him a 3-week stretch and say, hey, go win this for us. Because the Cardinals have had so many options of like, well, we need to get this guy going, and this guy's got to get at-bats, and this guy plays great defense. That's frustrating, but what was more frustrating...
Richie Palacios last year.
Yeah, Richie Palacios isn't in the good trade. There's a good one for you.
I was like, wait a second. I know there was one, but I can't think immediately who it was. Palacios would have been that guy last year.
My first thought last night, right before I turned the TV off, was, oh, God, now we're going to have to hear BK put the damn conductor hat on and say, the Cardinals are going to turn it around.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service X line to get involved in the show. We did get this from the 314. BK, you're just not a true baseball fan after all.
True.
Can't you feel good for a player that struggled so much this year?
Hockey
not
guy.
Really, honestly. Not really. And maybe that makes me a bad guy. I'm open to that. I mean, I feel like that's been well established here on this show. I'm not a great human being.
It's a ton problem.
I'm
You're
the best
fine.
of all of us.
I just...
Whoa.
I don't like coming on here and being negative. It's not fun for us. Do you guys realize that...
Sometimes it's fun.
Now it's becoming now like a joke, the way that this team has played for most of the season, as opposed to us just being mad all the time. Being mad sucks, dude. It's not a fun emotion to experience. I don't like coming on the radio and being upset. I would far more enjoy talking about all the happy things that could happen with your organization.
Well, then why not talk about it right now, BK?
Because there's not a whole lot to be excited about. I mean, if you're somebody that's holding out hope and you're saying, hey, this is 2011 all over again, like, God bless you, honestly. I respect that level of optimism that you're able to live with. I don't have that inside of me, because I go back over to the standings and I see, okay, even after last night, good win, nice win. They're 5 games back in the wild card standings of the Atlanta Braves and have 2 teams between them and the Atlanta Braves. So there's 3 teams ahead of you for 1 spot, and they're all playing better than you, which is not a high bar to clear, but they're playing better than you. So, yeah, I wasn't overly excited for Nolan Arenado last night because, frankly, he's been pretty frustrating to watch for 2 years now. I wasn't all that excited about the win, unfortunately. I wanted to be excited about it, but I just didn't have it in me. I can't fake the emotion that I felt.
I mean, that game,
I was more frustrated than excited last night.
The game, and again, this is going to sound super negative, and I don't mean to be, but it's where the Cardinals have put us this year. That game also was kind of handed to the Cardinals in the end of that one.
They also tried to hand it. They really tried to hand that one over to the Brewers. So that was that was not a well played baseball.
I was excited to come in to talk about the runners in scoring position problem once again for BK, where you have back-to-back bases loaded and don't score a run, but Nolan Arenado came through.
Oh, I totally thought they weren't going to score.
Oh, I did too.
Like, they had the bases low. It's like, oh my God, they're going to strike out twice. They're going to give up like 3 runs in the 11th.
They can't keep doing this with Goldie, man. It's sad to watch him right now.
I just feel bad for him more than anything, because then the guy's got to stand up and he's got to talk about how things have gone bad and he's lost his confidence. Like,
he's a pro, man. Like,
I know, but it sucks.
He's doing everything he can. I have no questions about that. This is not one of those things like Brett Cecil was playing video games and he didn't feel like he was overly excited about getting back onto the field.
In the clubhouse playing video games.
Yeah. That's not the case here with Paul Goldschmidt. This isn't a situation where a guy is just allowing he had God-given talent and he let it go away. No, he was an unbelievably hard worker, and nobody's trying harder than him to get back on track, and it's just not working. There are no answers here. It's over. It's over for Paul Goldschmidt being the player that he once was, and maybe in the offseason he's able to find something that clicks into place for him. It should be elsewhere, not here. But so many times recently, the game has found Paul Goldschmidt. A game on the line, big spot, it gets to Goldie, and you need him to come through, and he's just not capable right now of doing it, and it's sad for me to watch. I cringe watching it. It's hard for me to watch right now when Paul Goldschmidt's at the plate in those situations.
I just feel bad, like, on the personal side of it, because you know that guy's taking it home with him, and he's been a pro for a super long time, but imagine knowing that, like, your career might be over, and you have to take that home with you every single night because you keep coming up in big situations and can't come through for the team.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Paul Goldschmidt still has a role in baseball if he wants it next year. He's a perfect platoon bat. He's a guy that can start against left-handed pitching. That's the problem for the Cardinals right now. And
hey, you can't do that. Jordan Walker's doing that.
That's the thing is
he's still good against lefties, by the way.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, right now they're putting him in a bad position to start against right-handed pitching. Like, down the stretch, if they are actually buying this notion of that they're selling of we're still in this race, it would be beneficial both to the Cardinals and to Paul Goldschmidt to not start him against right-handed pitching. And maybe he does figure it out in the offseason.
I'd like to see what Luken can do.
Yeah, but
I don't think it's going to go well.
I was going with Burleson at first, but I like your thought process.
Luken needs to be your DH.
Well, you've got Mac. I'm not kidding. Matt Carpenter's your DH right now.
Matt Carpenter.
Or Matt Carpenter at first. You could do that
Yeah,
too.
I mean, any of those that you want to go with. But like Luken Baker, from everything that people tell us, he has no position to play defensively. He needs to be in your lineup every damn day. Like, again, I go back to the same conversation and complaint I have about when Jordan Walker was up here and they kept saying you can't play against righties. You've been running the same lineup out there since August 1st, and you have fallen out of a playoff spot. At some point, you need to switch it up. And guess what? You won last night. If Luken Baker and Jose Fermin are not in the lineup again today, I'm going to have a problem.
We'll get into that coming up next with Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. Kiley McDaniel previously worked in a front office in Major League Baseball. We want to talk to him about the Cardinals' development within their system, because it has clearly gone awry this year. You see what's going on with Nolan Gorman. You see what happened with Jordan Walker. You see what all of the outfielders, just point to any outfield in Major League Baseball. You've probably got a former Cardinals prospect that is succeeding elsewhere right now. We'll talk to him about how that happens, what he has seen from a national perspective with the Cardinals development issues. Kiley McDaniel at 11:30. But next time for the lineup game here on BK and Ferrario. Hey, it's BK. I got to tell you about my friends over at Victory Men's Health. It is time to unlock your inner champion. Maybe you were feeling kind of like me. You wake up in the morning, you're groggy, you don't have the same energy that you once did, and then you get home after work and you're thinking to yourself, man, do I have the energy to run around after my little ones at home? I didn't. I started taking naps after our show. I was tired. I had a vitamin deficiency that I didn't realize I had. I went over to Victory Men's Health, asked them if they could help unlock my inner champion, and that's exactly what they've done. I went over there, got the lab draw kit done. They came back with my micronutrient levels, and I find out I have some vitamin deficiencies. And when I don't have the supplements in me, I don't have that same amount of energy that I should. So they took care of me. They can take care of you as well. Whether it's a vitamin deficiency, maybe it's weight loss goals that you're struggling to meet on your own, low testosterone, erectile dysfunction, they can help you out with all of that over at Victory Men's Health. Set up your appointment today. Go online, victorymenshealth.com, or check out one of their 4 great locations across the St. Louis area. It's Victory Men's Health and victorymenshealth.com. Oh, it's time for the lineup game. Yes, I understand the balloon party apparently put this out there already earlier today. They did not play the game, though, and that means that we can here at BK and Ferrario. And the way the radio works, there's a lot of people that weren't listening then, so they can listen now. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. So let's go ahead and do this, Alex. Cardinals have a day game today. They're going up against Freddie Peralta. He is quite good. There have been some weird moments in the past, though, between Freddie Peralta and the Cardinals. He doesn't have the same amount of success against St. Louis as he does against other teams. That'll probably change today. You ready to go, Alex?
Sure, why not? This will be easy on a getaway day where they play again tomorrow.
Freddie Peralta is a right-handed pitcher, and that means that there will be nothing that changes at the top of the lineup. I'm going Mason Wynn.
I'm going Brendan Donovan. Mason Wynn's got a back problem. I think he needs a day off. But go ahead, we'll go Mason Wynn.
Mason Wynn.
I'm watching the Futures game, and this thing's all over Instagram. It's like, this guy threw a ball 100 across the time. That's awesome, but, like, how many throwing errors does he have?
Shut up!
Mason Wynn, really nice night last night. 3 for 6 overall.
I love that dude.
RBI, a couple of strikeouts, but what a spectacular rookie season he's had. He's fallen off from what his offensive numbers were at the beginning of the season. The power, though, is starting to show up in a way that's better than it was early on. I really like the place that he's found himself at.
Alec Burleson.
Burley, you're so rugged and manly.
All right, next one up. It's going to be Contreras.
He's the
do you
DH.
think he's the DH or the catcher?
Yeah, it's DH. After he had a rough night last night catching the ball. Tough night for our boy Wilson.
Wilson! 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 Wilson!
All right, well, it's got to be Grand Salami himself. Nolan Arenado!
No. Brendan Donovan.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Wait, hold on. You're not going to move Arenado up into the cleanup after a grand slam?
No. Left, right, left, right. You know you can't split that
You got to pounce on confidence with this dude whenever you can get it.
Are you going Arenado? Or do you want to go Donovan?
But you're El Capitan, sir.
We'll follow your lead. Show us.
Nolan Arenado.
What the H is wrong with you guys?
All right, show us Brendan Donovan.
All right! Way to go, Donnie!
I hate this stupid lineup.
Now, would you please show us
Nolan Arenado.
Oh, boy. To tell you how excited I was about his performance, I forgot to grab his sounder.
It's all good, man.
All right, batting 6 for the Cardinals today. Yesterday, they did something weird where they didn't have Victor Scott in the lineup. They said they're going to get everyday opportunities for Matt Carpenter and Tommy Pham, which, all right.
Hold on, where's Luken Baker and all those guys?
He's not going to start.
What?
I think it's Lars Nootbaar, but I will say, Alex, I do wonder if he's going to be starting in center field again and if they go that direction for the rest of the year. But
man, you're not going to play Victor Scott in center field?
I think this is Newt either way. So let's get Newt in this lineup. All right.
Do you give Goldie the day off?
I would. Do they? No, they're not going to do this. They're going to keep throwing him out there, but I think it's time for them to go without him.
I think they give him a day off.
Who do you think they have at batting 7th then?
Carpenter.
Go back-to-back lefties? Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I go Carp. Show me Carp.
Behalf of the veterans and new leadership.
Salsa, where's the salsa? No salsa.
Wow.
You can't put Gold. I'm telling you, man, that guy is mentally broken right now.
Good for them.
You got to give him the day off.
You want to bat him 8th?
Don't bat him 8th. This is Luken Baker right here. This is our guy, Luken.
I think it's Tommy Pham.
Well, Pajes is in here. So you really don't think Victor Scott's playing? Pajes is in here. You really don't think Victor Scott's playing? I think he's playing today.
I would go Tommy Pham here either way.
All right. Go Pham.
I mean, I've been in some real pain before. You know, I've been stabbed.
What a great guy.
All right. Do you think this is Victor Scott or Pedro Pajes? It's one of the two.
I would go Pajes here. And Victor Scott batting 9th.
Okay. Well, this
is 9th? It's got to be Pajes. You're not playing Contreras back-to-back. It's got to be Pajes.
All right.
You're wrong.
So Contreras is playing back-to-back days?
Victor Scott.
Great Scott.
Wow. We're playing Contreras back-to-back days behind the plate.
All right, guys. Today's starting lineup against Freddie Peralta. Mason Wynn leads off at short. Alec Burleson at first base. Wilson Contreras catching. Brendan Donovan at second. Nolan Arenado at third. Lars Nootbaar at right field. Matt Carpenter, the DH. Tommy Pham in left. And Victor Scott, the second, gets the start in center field.
Stupid Luken Baker's not playing. Just going to throw that one out there for you.
I don't mind this.
I do.
I don't mind it. Where are you putting Burley if not at first base?
It's keeping him where he is. Putting Carpenter at first base. I'm sorry. Burley goes to the outfield.
Who are you taking out?
Pham.
You taking Scott out?
No, Pham.
I don't mind this. I'm fine with it.
I mean, the dude hit a home run.
Luken Baker comes in late in a game. You get a lefty reliever on the mound, and he comes in for one of Alec Burleson or Matt Carpenter in that spot. I'm fine with this. Yeah. I think this is a perfectly adequate lineup. What I do love is that there's no Goldie in it.
But we just spent this segment talking about how it's great that they went after and get somebody who's tearing it up in Memphis. Guy hit a big home run for you last night. Play the guy.
See, I don't have an issue not starting Baker because I don't think Baker's a big leaguer. I think Baker's role.
Fine, but let's figure it out.
They are trying to figure out because the best role for Baker as a big leaguer is probably a bench bat.
This is who he's going to be. This is why, what I didn't like about the Jordan Walker decision is that you put him into a role that he will never fill. And if he reaches the potential of what the Cardinals are hoping for, he will almost never pinch hit. And he will almost never sit against right-handed pitching. So there was no reason for him to get him used to that. This is exactly the role that Luken Baker will likely fill next year if he's going to be a member of the 2025 Cardinals. So let's see what he looks like. Because pinch hitting is different, man. It is a different role than what most of these guys are comfortable with. Is he capable? Last night it sure looked like he was. So let's see if he can do that moving down the stretch. There are very few left-handed pitchers on the schedule. That's why Jordan Walker was sent back down. So if you're going to have this guy up, he's likely going to be a bench bat capacity for you. And if there's a lefty reliever that comes in and you got a lefty coming up to the plate, he can come in and pinch hit for those guys. I like it. I like most, though, that Goldie is not a part of this lineup. That is what unlocks you to do the other stuff with the lineup. It allows you to get Carpenter and Burleson and Donovan into the lineup together. I like it. I think that this is the way that they should be going more often than not the rest of the way. I think you should be getting a lot of off days for Paul Goldschmidt the rest of the way.
Yeah, that's where I am. When I saw this lineup, my first reaction was, I hope this becomes kind of the norm of Goldie's out one game a series, and you can play Alec Burleson at first base because he's the starting first baseman going into next year. We all seem to agree on that. Why not get him at more at-bats and get more comfortable playing the position while also, to your point, unlocking the lineup a little bit more to where you have the flexibility to have a bunch of those other lefties in the lineup as well.
Yeah, I think this is a perfectly fine way to go about it. I do think here in the next couple of weeks, though, they're probably going to Tommy Pham, I don't think is going to be a part of your everyday lineup. I would say Carpenter, probably the same thing. There will come a point in time where I'm totally with you, Alex. But for right now, especially until you get into September, once you're completely out of it, I'd probably go the direction that you're talking about. Get more Luken Baker opportunities. And
right now, they got to try and win games because they're still in this race.
Technically, yes. I think they're doing a good job right now today of kind of meeting in the middle. Of having a decent, who are the young guys that you want to see right now that aren't in the lineup that you would want to see?
Who helped you win the game last night?
Just Luken?
Yeah. I mean, if he's on the roster, going the same mindset as Jordan Walker, if he's on the roster, play the guy. And I understand it's probably not what's best. You got to figure out the bench. Fine. But big home run, put him in the lineup, let him see if he can build off of that. It's the DH position. We're making the argument over Matt Carpenter and Tommy Pham in the lineup.
Yeah, my point is basically, though, I want to find out how he succeeds in the role that he's going to be in next year. So, last year with Mason Wynn, I wanted to see him every day at shortstop because that's going to be his role. Just put him out there. Let's see what it looks like when he's in the lineup every day. Down the stretch, Nootbaar every day should be in your outfield. Jordan Walker eventually, I think, probably should be in the outfield every day for this team. Brendan Donovan, whatever you view as his future position for the team, just put him there every single day down the stretch. I believe that for Luken Baker, his role in the big leagues will be what he's doing right now, which is a bench bat that occasionally starts for you against left-handed pitching. So that's why I don't have as big of an issue with it, is because I think this is what he needs to get used to, is sitting on the bench for 6 innings and then potentially coming in to do damage against a left-handed pitcher late in a game. All right, with Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. We'll get into questions and answers in about 15 minutes or so. But coming up next, Kiley McDaniel is one of the best MLB insiders in the game. He also used to work in a front office in Major League Baseball. I want to talk to him about what the Cardinals have done wrong with the development of some of their young players. And as somebody that breaks down these prospects, is this the way that he expected it to go for guys like Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman? We'll talk to Kiley McDaniel about that next here on 101 ESPN. With Alex Ferrario, I'm Brandon Kiley for our friends over at Circus Sports in Illinois. Alex, now is the time where people should be placing their futures bet. We're just around the corner from the NFL season. Whether you want to bet on a team to make the playoffs, you want to bet on somebody to win the MVP, maybe you want to bet on somebody to win the Super Bowl. I gave my long shot odds Super Bowl winner the other day with the Indianapolis Colts. I like Anthony Richardson to potentially do his best Cam Newton impression as well as the MVP. The place to place all those bets is with Circus Sports in Illinois. You can also place those bets on Major League Baseball and who you think is going to win the World Series this year. Alex, they've got the best lines. They've got those type money line splits, and they recommend shop around, find where you're going to get the best odds. They believe you're going to find that over at Circa.
I love that exclusivity that tells you to go look at other apps because they know you're going to be coming back. That shows the confidence that is Circus Sports Illinois, and they should have it, like with what BK just mentioned. Plus, they're not limiting anybody based off of the winnings that they have through Circus Sports. Everyone is getting the same types of limits, unlike there are other sports books that see the amount of winnings and they limit those types of players. Plus, the customer service, you're actually speaking with a human, not a robot. It's the best app to download for all your sports betting needs. If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
Taylor Hendricks here at the Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Cardinals beat the Brewers yesterday on a walk-off grand slam from Nolan Arenado 10-6. They will be back in action today. 1:15 will be first pitch. Freddie Peralta gets to start for Milwaukee. Miles Michaelis will be on the mound for St. Louis. The Sports Center update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Kiley McDaniel has worked for multiple Major League Baseball teams. He now writes for ESPN.com. He's their MLB insider. He breaks down the prospects. He breaks down farm systems. So he's all about the young players in organizations. And right now, that is a big topic of conversation here in St. Louis with what's happened with both Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman, and flings wildly at every other outfield in Major League Baseball that is littered with former Cardinals outfield prospects.
Boy, if people could have seen that on YouTube.
Joins us now via the 101 ESPN hotline. Kiley, appreciate the time as always, man. When you look at what's happened, especially with Walker and Gorman, the two top prospects that the Cardinals had a couple of years ago in their system, both now in Memphis, not because they're hurt, but because of a lack of production, what do you see from the 10,000-foot view that has happened with these guys?
Thanks for having me. I would assume they're not there for the ribs, although that's a decent reason to go to Memphis. When you guys asked me to come on the show last night, I did I'd say like a medium dive, not a deep dive, but looked into, some of the underlying analytics and stuff and tried to figure out if there was something these guys had in common, or maybe some of the other younger players. Is there like something that is like specifically not working with across multiple players? And I didn't really see anything. Like with Gorman, he's always been a sort of steep in the zone swing that's trying to lift the ball and hit hard. There's going to be some in zone miss with that. That's just kind of how it works. Power hitters have that. his in-zone contact got worse, and then his chase also got worse, and then he didn't walk as much. And so he just wasn't hitting the ball hard often enough to make up for that.
38% strikeout rate will do that, Kiley.
Yeah. So, like, that's, like, sort of the underlying thing that led to the strikeout rate. Because sometimes it's chasing out of the zone. Sometimes it's you're getting too steep in the zone, trying to lift everything. So, like, you and the pitch aren't interacting very much. He was doing a little bit of both. And then Walker, it seems like, was trying to go for a little more contact at the expense of some power, which I think was probably the right move. But his chase out of the zone got worse, and he didn't lift the ball more, which had been his issue going back a couple of years, that he hit the ball really hard, like among the hardest in the minors, and probably the hardest if you adjust for age. But he wasn't lifting the ball a lot, so it wasn't always showing up in home run numbers. And so while he made more like bat-to-ball contact, he was still chasing enough that in the big league, you can hit in AAA doing that if you're really talented, which he is. In the big leagues, it doesn't really work. And so the only sort of overlap I saw between those two guys specifically is their chase rate either didn't improve or got a little bit worse, which is just, swinging at pitches outside of the zone, which is the kind of thing that guys like this can do in AA and AAA and can't do in the big leagues. And you've seen guys like Victor Scott perform in AAA and then not perform in the big leagues. His issue is slightly different, but, from sort of the fan perspective of like, oh, these guys are supposed to be really good and they're really talented and they're young and they do all these things well, and then they come up and they don't perform. They're all slightly different. Like, a lot of times you'll see something where, like, oh, a team is bad at blank, or they tend to acquire players who are bad at blank, and so they end up getting the same kind of guy. I don't think that's necessarily what's going on here. I don't want to just, like, chalk this up to bad luck, because, like, obviously Walker and Gorman have some overlap in terms of being similar kinds of talents that have come up and then sort of failed at the same time after showing you some success. This could just be bad luck, but obviously the group of young hitters that I feel like I've been coming on this show for a couple of years to be like, oh, yeah, like there's 6 or 8 good guys. If you go AA, AAA, big leagues, all the guys under age 25, they'll get a couple dudes will pop this year, and just nobody's really popped other than maybe Mason Wynn. Like, he's maybe the only guy that sort of beat or met expectations, and all the other guys have been at or below. So I can see why you're frustrated. I don't have a very convenient answer for you, though.
No, that's fair. And I think the question that I would have as a follow-up to that, Kiley, is like, what do you do as an organization to remedy those problems? Because their answer currently is send them down to AAA. I think you can make the argument it was way too late doing so with Nolan Gorman. You can make an argument that maybe it was too early with Jordan Walker, and now they're going up and down, and it's just been a mess, honestly, with the last couple of years and the way that everything's gone. But I'm curious for you, who you've been in an organization before, and now you're looking at this from the outside looking in. What do you see that has maybe the most success with guys like these that have some success at the AAA level, that get up to the big league level and they struggle? Do you just let them keep going and fail and learn at the job? Or is it best to send them back down to have some success again? How do you view that?
So we had some examples of this when I was in Atlanta. Austin Riley was a guy that basically needed a full season at a league to find success. And then when you promoted him to the next league, he was kind of terrible for like the first 2 months. Like, I talked to him about this. He was like, yeah, I don't know why. I just can't make that adjustment. And I think it's because what his issue was, his hands get really far away from his body, which is how you create bat speed and create power. But at each level, the velocity, the strikes, the breaking ball, they all get a little bit better. So if his hands are getting a little further away because he's feeling good about himself because he really dominated AA, and then he gets to AAA, his hands get a little further away, all the stuff gets better. It takes him a few months to dial in that timing. That's basically how he explained it to me, is there's like a timing issue. So if you take that as like sort of an idea, is like there is a specific thing each of these guys are doing wrong. And again, I didn't do the deep dive, so I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I can tell you how the results were different. Is you look at what they're doing and diagnose, oh, the biggest problem is blank. If we can get Gorman to 27% strikeout rate, this all can work, in quotes. Like, this can be fine. What is the problem creating the strikeout rate jumping from 27 to 38 or, whatever it is? It is probably some combination of what kind of pitches is he looking for, what is his thought process at the plate. There's probably a slight mechanical change. Maybe his hands are getting too far away from him. And so you have to send him to AAA until you can fix that. And that may take a whole season. That might take 2 weeks. Victor Scott, for example, I have looked at him a little more closely. If you look at him last year to the beginning of this year, his power, all the power numbers, all the indicators, big deals, all that sort of stuff went down. Normally they would go up as you sort of get bigger and stronger and sort of develop your swing more. And he started flapping at the ball, and then he went to AAA, and he got his hips more included in the swing, his lower half engaged, and the power got better, and then he got called back up. And the swing now looks more sustainable. We'll see if that sort of creates the numbers that you want to see. But it could happen as quickly as 2 or 3 weeks, where it seems like so small of a sample that might have been lucky. But if you can see that the swing changed, then you can say, oh, this is now a different player, maybe a little bit different, maybe a lot different. We'll see. And so each of these guys have a thing they have to work on. And I think the problem has been you could have said this thing about Gorman 3 years ago, and it seems like you're still kind of circling that same area. And there's guys like Riley that can come up and be terrible in the big leagues and then go back down. And it takes them a year or two. You guys are the more these guys get sent up and down and get called up because there's a need for a third baseman and not because they fixed the thing, the harder it is to find that solution. And you get into that area where the guy needs a change of scenery. I think we're a couple years away from that, but that is the road we're starting to go down, that you'd like to think that there is an 8 to 12 month solution where you can find the answer and not have to just sort of throw your hands up and be like, I don't know, let's call him up and see what happens. That's in place of a plan. You don't want that.
So, Kiley, that's probably the common phrase we hear from Cardinals fans every time a move happens with a Walker or Gorman or really any prospect in the Cardinals system is the Cardinals are breaking this kid. Is it possible for an organization to break a prospect or ruin a prospect?
Yes. I've talked to players about this before. It is very difficult. I think there was probably a version of it right after I left the Braves. Again, not to throw shade on them, but there were so many top 100 pitching prospects that there was not room for all of them on a contending team. So you have all of these, you guys might not even know these names, but Bryce Wilson, Chucky Toussaint, Mike Soroka, there were all these, Ian Anderson, that looked like they might have been the guy, kind of had a hot couple of weeks, Tucker Davidson, it just kind of went on forever. There were like a ton of them. And you have the Max Fried or, whoever it is that breaks through as the guy, and you're like, oh, well, we'll get a couple of these guys. And the answer is you usually have like one or two of them. When you have a group of like 10 young pitching prospects that all they could be like real contributors, the answer is usually you have like 3. And the other 7 are either like relievers, up-down guys you trade, extra guys, or just total busts. And so a lot of times you have to look at that group of players as we're going to, if you take this like whole group of Ivan Herrera and Burleson and Newt Barr, like this Donovan, all the way down to Mason Wynn and Victor Scott and GC, like you have all these guys, and I'd like to think that there's 5 or 6 good players there, and it can be the core of the next good team. But sometimes you look at that and it turns out you thought you had 10 guys, you're hoping to get 5 or 6 out of it, and like maybe you get 2 or 3. Like maybe in any organization this wouldn't work. But yeah, I don't know. It's a challenge because all of these guys are unique. You can't treat them all the same. The problem is not the same. The solution is not going to be the same. And a lot of times you need to call these guys up to fix a short-term hole that will then hurt the long-term plan. And the reason I mentioned that Braves story to bring it back around is if you have a bunch of young players that haven't broken through but are kind of too good for AAA, but they're on the 40-man and you might need some help and you can't take them off the 40-man, you might have to call them up when they're not ready, and that might screw them up. And so trying to contend and also develop young players when it might take them a couple of years to do it, but you don't have a couple of years of letting them do it. Like in soccer, you send them off to a bad team and let them figure it out there with no pressure, and then they come back when they're ready. You can't do that in baseball. It'd be great if you could. There's that weird in-between line, and the Cardinals might be in that area because I think they see themselves as contenders in the sort of medium to long term, and so there's not always room for these players to figure it out if they're not going to be immediate contributors when they come up.
I'm going to read you a quote. Kiley. We're talking to Kiley McDaniel here on 101 ESPN. This is from Cardinals manager Ollie Marmol on why they decided to do what they did with Jordan Walker, which was call him up after a 2-week hot stretch to be a platoon player specifically to start against left-handed pitching, okay? Because what you just said feels exactly like what the Cardinals are doing right now. Quote, your 40-man roster is there to help your 26-man roster. That's the reason for the 40-man. If there's an opportunity where you think one of those players who are on the 40-man can help the 26-man, even if it's for 3 days, that is important, end quote. So essentially, they said, even if this role is not best for Jordan Walker's development, it is what we need for our big league club, and our big league club is struggling right now, specifically against left-handed pitching, so we got to call this kid up. That's my concern, is they are prioritizing potentially having a 5% chance of making the playoffs this year on a team that is still under 500, and they're doing so at the expense of the development of one of the prized prospects in the organization.
And the 2 outcomes this could be is Walker could come up, maybe it turned out he fixed something, and then he's going to go off and slowly take somebody's job and become the player you want him to be, and everything will be sunshine and rainbows. Or he's going to come up, he's going to fall flat on his face, it's not going to work, you're going to send him back down, and now he's going to have a disconnect between I need to fix X, Y, and Z to go up, and it's like, oh, or if they just need me, I'll go up, and who knows what will happen. I didn't actually fix anything. I don't even know what the connection is between me getting better and me going up. Again, to bring it back to that Braves example, like we had a lot of really good players. The position players hit really well. It was, Riley and Acuna and Albies and all those dudes, and it worked out really well. And with the pitching, I think we thought we had a lot of really good pitchers, but it was Soroka was good for a year or two, got hurt, and ended up not being a guy for us. Fried came up. He was a guy. Ian Anderson was good for a year or two. He ended up not being a guy. And then all those other names I said, the Toussaints, the Wilsons, all those guys essentially got traded for nothing because they got sent up and down so many times. Their value went from top 100 to, maybe like a buy low candidate for a last place team that could give him some room to operate. And then eventually it was like waiver claim, toss in, whatever. That's kind of what happens. And so that is, again, that's the road you just took the off-ramp to that you're going down. You could get right back on the interstate and end up with Austin Riley, or you could stay off the interstate and end up with one of those other players. And again, that's the problem, because if you were Jordan Walker and you were like, hey, we could trade you to the White Sox, and they could have a very specific plan of either we're going to let you play, no pressure, you just get the spot for the rest of the year and we're going to figure it out. Or maybe they think you need to be in AAA to work on a specific thing, but they don't care if they have to go sign some guy off the street to take the spot on the 40-man to go be in the big leagues, and you can be one of the 40-man guys in AAA, and you'll stay there as long as you need to stay there. That is actually the teams I was working for that were bad, that was one of the benefits we had. It wasn't just you get a good draft pick or you get to be at the front of the waiver line or you get slightly better minor league deal guys in the offseason because they think they're going to make the big league roster. Is you can go trade for, like the Rays did with Dylan Carlson. It's like, hey, this is going to cost us almost nothing. This guy was good a couple years ago. We think he can do it. That's better than some random guy that we think is not worth putting on the 40-man. Let's go take a shot on this guy and fix it. You have the runway to give these guys a chance to do it. And I would say about a year from now, if these guys haven't figured it out and stuck, they're going to be in the same place that we heard rumors that Miami's trying to trade with the Mets for Brett Beatty. All these guys that came up and couldn't do it, and then the team didn't want to give them the runway to do it, but then the team is competing, and eventually it gets to, okay, do we want to go ahead and trade this guy for maybe 60 cents on the dollar of what we think he can be and just sort of get something and move on? Or do we want to really try to force this and find a solution? And is that going to be the thing that makes us go from a playoff team to a not playoff team because we had a sinkhole for 1 year, because that might be what happens? That's a really tough question. And to go back to some of the stuff you guys have said to me before, it's like, is that the position that Arozarena was in? Has this happened multiple times before with this regime?
Carlson, Arozarena, Adolis Garcia,
Lane Thomas.
That they don't do well with because they think they have to make the playoffs every year, so they can't give the runway to the young player. I don't know if that is the answer, but it's happened enough. You can ask the question.
And that's where I want to finish with you, Kiley. And we'll get you out of here on this. We appreciate the time as always. Kiley McDaniel is our guest here on 101 ESPN. You can read his great work over at ESPN.com. He's got a piece right now on the free agency rankings. I so badly want to care about it, and I just don't here in St. Louis, unfortunately, because I don't think that that's the direction that the Cardinals need to be going, Kiley. I think it might be time for them to finally take a step back, and next year to just say, you know what, we need to go with a bit of a youth movement. Let's find out what these young pitchers can do that are stalling out right now at the AAA level. Let's find out what we have in Nolan Gorman and in Jordan Walker and Alec Burleson and all these young guys, and just give them the time that they need. You just mentioned some of the value of not really going for it in any given season. Do you see the Cardinals as a team that could extract a decent amount of value this offseason and then certainly going into next year if they were to make that kind of a decision of, you know what, no more Kyle Gibson, no more Lance Lynn, not bringing back Paul Goldschmidt. Let's just go ahead and go with more of a youth movement and not tank, but give these guys the time next year to develop at the major league level?
And I would even go one step further, where instead of giving $8 or $10 or $12 million to those sort of veteran band-aids that you're hoping you're fixing the problem you have without having to go give somebody $200 million, you can instead go take somebody's $7 million bad contract with a player that maybe you release right away and get a prospect on top of it. If you just for 12 months turn on the we're going to go get some players, like you saw what Tampa did. Tampa did that because there weren't a lot of sellers in the market. This was the 1 year where they could tell at the deadline they probably weren't going to be a factor. And so they're like, all right, we have a very rare opportunity where we can actually sell, we can fill a hole in the market, we can get a bunch of players, and we can set up our next 4 to 5 year run. I know, going into this deadline, apparently Toronto's ownership told them, you can't go trade Bichette and Guerrero and all those guys. We also won't let you extend them. We're not doing all that right now. We can't tear it down. We put too much money into this team with Barrios and Springer and all these deals that we can't even really trade. Gaussman's got only so much time left at a good price. You don't get the option to tear it down. I wonder if that is what's going on in St. Louis, that the sort of agreement or the mandate is you don't get to tear it down. You don't get to not compete for a year. But you look at the Cubs, it's not obviously a similar franchise. It's not like the fans don't show up because you're not good for a year or two. The fans will still show up. I think the revenue is still going to be there. I think it's really just a question for the powers that be, the owner, the president, the GM. Can we stomach just giving Tink Hence the fifth starter job going into spring training and see what happens. And if it doesn't, then you have Graceppo and Reverse and, Kloffenstein and all these guys that are options, rather than just signing Lance Lynn or Kyle Gibson and blocking it off and saying, no, this is a veteran thing. That's not for you guys. You guys only get the spot when you're totally ready. I think that's the right move to do, like the power reset, where it's like 1 year off and then we build it back up, or even what Seattle did, where they intentionally stepped back for 2 years, cut the payroll, save the money, and then invested the payrolls into what they're doing right now, which is obviously works. Like, a lot of times when you try to have a plan for we're going to have this many wins for the next 3 years, it doesn't work. But like, teams have proven that if you know what you're doing, you can do it. I wonder if there is enough flexibility in the mentality of the people running this team to be able to do that, because I think that makes a lot of sense, especially with all the young players they have at AA, AAA, and the big leagues that haven't quite figured it out, that need some room. This might be a unique opportunity to take a year and a half, maybe 2 full years, and let that work itself out. And you might be better at the end of it than you are at the beginning if you're just willing to say, we're probably not going to win the World Series next year. Let's really not win the World Series and try to set ourselves up to really win one after that.
Yeah, because right now they're not winning the World Series anyways. Hey, Kiley, this has been great, man. Always enjoy catching up with you. Thanks so much. I know it was late notice on us getting you on, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the development issues that they're going through right now, and I think this served our listeners really well. So thanks for the time, as always. We'll be reading your work over at ESPN.com and certainly talking with you again soon, my friend.
All right, thank you.
That's Kiley McDaniel, one of the best in the business. Love talking with him about the minor league system. And I thought there was a lot of really good stuff there, Alex,
Absolutely.
about where the Cardinals currently find themselves. We'll talk a little bit about that. Here's some of your questions that may have popped into your mind based upon that interview coming up next. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Questions and answers is next here on 101 ESPN. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line from the 314. Guys, we just had a really great conversation with Kiley McDaniel, who, if you missed any of that, check it out on the podcast page after the show today. 101ESPN.com, the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dubs Tire and Auto Centers.
Somebody asked a question on the text line, Alex. Do you think that we should have done more on the deadline as sellers instead of buyers to do essentially what Tampa Bay did this year?
I mean, do I think they should have? Probably. They didn't because they were in a playoff spot. But to what Kiley was saying, and I think I mentioned this too, we talked about it on the show, like, it just feels like you're always in denial. And like, yes, you were in a playoff spot. Yes, you needed to compete in that situation. And I mean, you got a piece that's going to be on this roster next year. But I mean, if you want to go down the path of what Tampa said, and if you want to do what Kiley's talking about, yeah, you probably should have tried to be sellers at the deadline.
Yeah, I still don't mind that they bought, if I'm being honest. And I know it blew up in their face, but it's not like they gave up anything. You know, it's not like, well, outside of Carlson, who now looks like Babe Ruth. But
wait till
he was
back.
a washed-up asset here in St. Louis. You know, he wasn't going to have a role for the team, so you sell him for pennies on the dollar, and you get a reliever. If we're being honest, Sean Armstrong's been fine. He wasn't going to be a guy that was going to set the world on fire. Eric Fetty's been fine. Tommy Phan's been pretty good. And you got him for Tommy Edman, who hadn't played a single game for you. So I don't mind the fact that they ended up buying. Now, if you told me should they have been buying and selling, I could have heard an argument for it, but I think if you traded Ryan Helsley, you would have been the spot the Brewers were in 2022.
Well, and you're not buying and selling at that time, you're selling.
Yeah,
exactly.
If you're trading Helsley, you're not making those other moves.
Because you're not competing for a playoff spot.
Exactly. So I have no issue with the fact that they bought. I thought it was a smart move, as long as you didn't give up a lot. They didn't give up a lot. They remained kind of cash neutral. It's just blown up in their face. And you know what? Sometimes that happens when you buy.
I thought it was the smart move at the time to do what they did. I did not think they should punt on the season because you just never know. You never know if this was the year that maybe it was going to come together. The opposite has happened. They fell apart after the deadline, and that's why it looks bad in retrospect. You were 3 games above 500 at the time of the deadline. If you continued playing at or above what you were previously, you'd probably be like right there with Atlanta right now, because Atlanta has not like taken off by any stretch.
Yeah.
The rest of this wild card chase for that third wild card spot has been basically every bit as bad as you have been since the trade deadline. They've all taken a step back, other than the Diamondbacks and the Padres, who have really elevated away from the rest of the field. So I think it was smart to go for it at the deadline and to not go all in at the deadline. All you traded really was Tommy Edman and Dylan Carlson, and you got back a few assets in return. They approached it the right way. It did not work out. Could they have set themselves up better for 2025 if they had sold? Absolutely. No doubt about it. But look back to what they did last year at the deadline. They ended up getting, I believe it was 6 pitchers, and 5 are currently on the injured list from last year's deadline. Thomas Saggese was a part of that. He has not yet made an appearance for the Cardinals in 2025. So you do have to be a little careful with just how much value you place on these prospects. Most of them that get traded at the deadline never become big leaguers, and almost none of them become impact players at the big league level. And then there's the Royals, who traded for Cole Reagans at the deadline last year in return for Aroldis Chapman, and Cole Reagans is now one of their top starters, and they are now potentially going to go on a playoff run in part because of him. So it's tough.
It's just tough because Ryan Helsley was such a big-time deal at the time, and you don't know what you could have gotten. You could have gotten another TK Roby and Thomas Saggese in it, and not even talking about him. But that's always the hindsight, which is tough. But exactly. You could have also got the Cole Reagans in it as well for Ryan Helsley. And at some point, you got to do what Kiley's talking about, and you have to admit where you're at.
And I think that's the soft season.
Yeah, you can't go anywhere positively if you keep living in denial. And it feels like the Cardinals have been living in denial for a couple of years.
All right, last thing here, guys. Why do you think that it is that Jose Fermin is here and not Thomas Saggese? The truth is the 40-man roster,
and he doesn't have to play. Yeah. They want guys to play every single day, and he doesn't have to. I mean, Saggese wouldn't be playing.
I would feel the same way about Saggese that I do about Luken Baker. I don't need him to be a starter. Like, there's potentially starting opportunities here for him, but I don't know that Thomas Saggese's long-term role here in St. Louis is as a starting second baseman or a starting third baseman. It might be that he's a utility infielder, and when there's guys that are on the injured list, he starts every day.
But depending on what this roster looks like, though, because after this offseason, there might be a starting spot for Thomas Saggese if they go down the right path.
But like the rest of this year, if they didn't view the 40-man the way that they do, which is that you can't move any of these guys off of it. Like, Fermin doesn't have a role here long-term. So if they wanted to DFA Fermin today, they could. And you just bring up Thomas Saggese for the exact same role. That's no disrespect to Jose Fermin. He'd probably get picked up by the other organization. But He doesn't have a long-term future here. Let's be honest about it. He's probably going to get DFA'd this offseason for Thomas Sajasi because he's a Rule 5 eligible player, and they have to put him on the 40-man. So I would put value on him getting opportunities here. They clearly don't, so whatever. But, yeah, that's why he's not here right now. I just disagree with their opinion on the matter, and I would have him up, and I would have him starting twice a week.
They got to save that 40-man spot for Crawford for Matz, who I think started yesterday or starts today. Like, he'll be activated in the next, 3 days, 4 days. So that's where that 40-man spot's going, is it's going to Steven Matz. Yeah. I'm not telling you got to like that, because to your point, I would just DFA for Mean, but that's where it's going.
He's Alex Ferrario, that's Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kiley. In 15 minutes, we'll get into some NFL quick hitters, but next, we need to take a look back at some of these recent first-round picks for the Cardinals. What's happened here? Why aren't they having success?
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
I'm going to read you some names. We're going to go into the Wayback Machine here on 101 ESPN. With Alex and T-Bone on BK, so the Cardinals need to take a hard look in the mirror right now because you look at their recent first-round picks, guys. Whew, it ain't great. And it goes back quite some time. Alex, when you look back at what they have done, it's both pitching, which we've talked about ad nauseum, but also position players now. And when we talked to Kiley McDaniel about this a little bit earlier today, one of the things that I really kind of wanted to get to is this a Cardinals player selection problem or a Cardinals player development problem? And the answer is probably somewhere in between, maybe a combination of both. But I'm going to read you some names, okay? Is this going back over the years? These are just their first round position player selections, okay?
I do this with the Blues draft, and then I go and say, like, hey, who could they have drafted instead of this player? And, oh, man.
Don't play that game.
It is very depressing. Oh, I'm playing it right now in my notebook. I'm going to give you the names. Don't worry.
All right, 2023, the Cardinals selected Chase Davis. Now, it's been up and down so far for Chase Davis in the Cardinals minor league system. He got hot a little bit earlier this year. I have not checked recently what he's doing in high A, but it's too early to say whether that was a hit or a miss, but I would say it's closer to miss than hit right now, okay? Before that, the next position player that they selected in the first round was Jordan Walker. Signs were pointing up for the first, 3 years. And now, at best, it's flat. I don't know what Jordan Walker is going to be. I'm still personally buying all of your Jordan Walker stock if you're selling. I believe he's going to be a good player in Major League Baseball. But right now, it's not trending in a positive direction, I think it's fair to say. Nolan Gorman, 2018. I don't really know what to make of Nolan Gorman right now. 2016, Dylan Carlson. Fair to say miss at this point?
Well, not for Tampa Bay.
2016, Delvin Perez.
Miss.
Whiff.
That was a miss.
I totally understand how you ended up there, but miss. 2015, Nick Plummer, outfielder, high school outfielder. Ended up going to the Mets for nothing, so miss. Steve Bean in 2012, a catcher from Rockwall High School.
This one's my favorite.
I don't recall Steve Bean. If you told me the name Steve Bean, tell me what word association. Where's he from? I was like, did I know Steve from communications class in high school?
Steve Bean was drafted in the first round of the Major League Baseball draft by the Cardinals and does not have a Wikipedia page.
He was a part of the supplemental round. You remember back when they were doing that? He was the 59th overall pick. So technically not like an actual first round pick, but Steve Bean was a catcher from Rockwall High School, and I have no recollection of the gentleman existing.
Steve Bean worked at the old Italian restaurant down the street from me when I lived on the hill.
Did they write the wrong name in when they submitted their card?
I don't know, man. Patrick Wisdom, 2012, miss.
Miss.
Steven Piscotty, 2012,
miss.
I would say that's a
okay.
You got what you needed out of that.
I'd say you're disappointed with it, though, because it didn't live up to the first-round potential that you thought it was when you drafted him.
He was a productive player when here, and obviously incomplete almost feels like the right grade there, despite the fact that it happened 13 years ago. James Ramsey, outfielder from Florida State.
Miss. Yes. They traded him. I don't remember for who, though.
Colton Wong in 2011. That's a win.
Ramsey was in the trade for Hayward, wasn't he?
I don't remember. Maybe.
James Ramsey ended up...
I know he got dealt. I think they won the trade with Ramsey, though.
James Ramsey was dealt to...
Justin Masterson.
Masterson.
Oh, yeah, never mind.
2014. Yeah, that was a loss.
Wash of a trade.
He never appeared in a big league game.
Yeah.
Colton Wong was a win. Zach Cox in 2010.
Now that got Edward Mujica.
Yeah, that
was a win.
Brett Wallace, another guy that ended up
got you Matt Holliday.
A pretty significant trade. Pete Kozma.
No.
I don't know that I would consider him a win for a first-round pick, but at least he became a productive big leaguer. And that's it for the last... Oh, no, you have 2005, Colby Rasmus and Tyler Green.
That was a miss. It was great for the Houston Astros, so.
Both of those were misses.
Colton Wong is pretty clearly the best first-round selection over the last 20 years among the position players. Who's second?
Well, on that list, Piscotty.
Steven Piscotty was your second best first-round position player selection over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Did you say Piscotty or Flaherty?
Well, position player.
Oh, position player. Okay. Steve Bean.
What does it say about your organization and the way that things have gone over the last 20 years, position player, prospects, development-wise, if the second best first-round pick that you've had was Steven Piscotty, who's traded like 3 years in?
I mean, it says I mean, for me, it says two different things. One, you do not know how to draft. Like, you've got issues with your draft. Like, again, we could play the game real quick of guys that were drafted a couple of picks after some of these players. I didn't go back through them all, but like Will Smith of the Dodgers was drafted 4 picks after Delvin Perez. You took Nick Plummer and you took
we really needed a catcher too.
You took Nick Plummer and Jake Woodford in the first round. One was the first round, the other was the comp pick. Walker Buehler and Austin Riley were selected. Luke Weaver, nobody was really taken. That was great for you. Marco Gonzalez and Rob Kaminsky were both taken in the first round, and Aaron Judge was taken 4 picks after Rob Kaminsky.
Nobody saw Aaron Judge coming.
Yeah, who would have thought a 7-foot dude?
Yeah,
seriously,
260-pound guy with crazy athleticism and a power swing.
Michael,
never would have thought
working at this level.
Michael Waka and James Ramsey. Now Waka was still good for you.
I'm not crushing them for the Waka selection. That worked, and it was a huge win for the organization.
But we'll go off to James Ramsey because you had Marcus Stroman and Jose Barrios that were selected after James Ramsey.
I brought up Waka for a reason.
Colton Wong, Blake Snell was selected like 15 picks after.
I'm not crushing them for the Wong thing. That was a win.
And then Zach Cox, who did get you Edward Mujica, but Nick Castellanos was selected 12 picks after. And again, that's just stopping at Delvin Perez. I didn't get to go back any further. But so part of me looks at this and says, okay, well, you identify the wrong types of talent in the Major League Baseball draft. And I understand sometimes guys just don't develop in certain organizations. We've seen guys like a Dylan Carlson never hit his potential here, probably will with Tampa Bay. But the flip side of that, I do look at that development and say, okay, there's a underlying problem. Maybe it's more so what Kiley was telling us in terms of this is a team that just always feels like they should be competing for a playoff spot. And when you're drafting guys in the first round, there's just no room for you to grow. You're going to be in the minors until something happens, and even then, you're probably going to be stuck down there. Development takes a halt. But at some point, you look at this and say, like, what has gone wrong with Dylan Carlson, with Nolan Gorman, with Jordan Walker, with Chase Davis, with Nick Plummer, with all of these players, Steve Bean specifically, RIP to Steve Bean in his Major League career.
He might still be around. I don't know.
No, RIP to Steve Bean, but Steve Bean's career.
Yeah.
I want to find him and get him on the show.
We totally need to get Steve Bean. I didn't have a Wikipedia page. But there's obviously a problem in terms of being drafted out of high school or college and getting to the major leagues in terms of how does this player not develop into a major league player?
So somebody on the text line said, guys, you could do this for most Major League Baseball teams. Most first-round picks don't end up working.
Didn't we do this for the Dodgers?
It is true. Like a lot of teams, you can go back through and say, man, they had a lot of misses. Do you want to do the Dodgers real quick?
Sure.
Position
I don't
players?
think there's position players.
I guarantee you they don't have a Steve Bean in their list.
Corey Seager,
Oh, that worked out.
2012.
That worked out pretty well for them.
I'd say kind of a win.
Where did they draft Corey Seager at, BK?
First round. They drafted him 18th overall, which is like
right around where you are
most years. Yeah. Gavin Lux, not a huge win, but a good player now.
It looks like they're starting to kind of
Gavin
click
Lux
with
is
him
like
now.
Colt Wong, who we just said is the best position player that you have drafted as the Cardinals.
He
in the
would
first
be
round.
your best position player if you would have drafted him in the first round.
Will Smith, who Alex brought up.
Well, you got Delvin Perez instead, and we all know that worked out.
Just those 3 alone is better than anything that the Cardinals have selected at any point in the last 20 years, and all of those have taken place in the last 12. So, yes, you can absolutely do what I'm talking about here with most organizations across Major League Baseball, because most first-round picks don't work. People get excited about who you select in the first round. 50% of them will almost never see a game in the big leagues. Another 25% will be bit players in the big leagues, and then maybe 25% of them will become regulars or really good players, right? It's why the draft is so freaking hard and why you don't just judge on the first round. But when you have a 20-year period in which basically none of your first-round position player selections are working out at the big league level, there has to be an audit within the organization as to why that is happening. Is it a player selection process that is breaking down, or is it a player development process that is breaking down? Because it is very clearly at least one of those 2 things for the Cardinals. And I don't know which one is the problem for them. It seems as though the players that the Cardinals are selecting, people that are independent evaluators, will look at them and say, man, these guys are really talented. And they see them in the Cardinals minor league system while they're still in the lower levels. They see them when they're selected, and they're like, man, all right, look at all these guys. Look at this power for Jordan Walker, or look at this prospect that just has all of the tools for Jordan Walker. Look at the power for Nolan Gorman. Look at the bat-to-ball skills for Alec Burleson. Look at the all-around player for Dylan Carlson. And people see these, and they're like, top 40 prospect in Major League Baseball. So it appears that the player selection process is pretty good. And then for whatever reason, it stalls. And that's what I think they need to figure out. And I don't have the answers for it. It's not my job to have the answers for it. But inside of that organization, that is something that they absolutely need to get to the bottom of, because it's at the heart as to why the 2023 and 2024 seasons have gone so off of the rails.
Yeah, and that's why I would say on the position player side, it feels more of player development because of what you're talking about. But the evaluators that cover baseball from the kind of the 1,000-foot view will look at those players and say, boy, look at the tools. And then they go in the lower levels of the minor leagues and you go, man, they continue to produce. And then as they get higher, it just kind of flames out. And it really flames out when you get to the big league level. I think when you talk about kind of and I know we're focusing on the position player side, when you talk about the pitching side, those picks that are always said as safe picks, like the Michael McGreevy, always the number 4, number 5. When that guy flames out, that to me is where you look at it and say that's just a player selection problem. When evaluators look at a draft pick and say, the ceiling's not very high for that guy, well, then, yeah, it's more likely he's going to flame out in the minor leagues. That tells me that's a player selection problem. You're not shooting for upside. You're just kind of taking the middle road. But in modern baseball, that's very hard to do. I think you have to be great at something to be at one of those top-end draft picks and be those guys that you think can really push through the system and get to the big leagues. Problem is what you're seeing with the Cardinals is they take those guys, they have success lower levels. I think it's a player development issue, and they're not helping them get through the AAA level to the big league. That's why you've seen Jordan Walker flame out, Nolan Gorman flame out, potentially even Lars Nootbaar kind of start to flame out a little bit as well.
I think the thing, too, is because a lot of people look at those later ones and say, like, yeah, but most recently, like, go to the 2021 where the Cardinals selected McGreevy 18th overall. Like, Jackson Merrill was selected 27th by the Padres, and you're already talking about this kid being in the Rookie of the Year conversation. Like, that's the problem, I think, when it comes to development is it always feels like, well, you're going to wait a few years to see these guys, which most of the time you do. Some of the time you don't even see some of these players. But then there's always that one or two players that, like, comes out of nowhere, and it's like, how did this kid develop so fast? Meanwhile, Jordan Walker had all of this status, and you're still looking at it saying, yeah, but he still hasn't figured it out in the minor leagues yet.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. It's just when we looked back at some of the first-round selections, especially coming off the Gorman news yesterday, I was like, man, it's been a while since they've really developed a guy through their minor league system that was considered to be a highly touted prospect that ended up coming up to the big leagues and then just had multiple years of success at this level.
Zach Thompson, George Kirby was selected 2 picks after Zach Thompson.
That's the thing that I think you can do a lot of. Like,
it's fun.
Because there's always somebody that's going to hit in the first round, in the late first round. So you can always point back to, well, if they drafted that guy. You can do that in the NFL or the NHL drafts as well.
Do it a lot at the NHL, big boy.
I'm not so much criticizing the Cardinals for, like, not getting that guy. It's more of why didn't the Cardinals at any point have that guy that other teams point to? Why aren't they the ones that had the selection where you're like, man, Will Smith, man, could have had Corey Seager, man, could have had Aaron, like, could have had the guy, and the Cardinals don't end up with them. All right, 314-399-9646 is the Your Comfort Service text line. In about 10 minutes or so, have the Blues improved their secondary scoring enough going into this season? I went back and looked at what the Blues had in their bottom 6 last year scoring-wise, Alex, and compared it to some of the guys that they've acquired this offseason. We'll get into that in about 15 minutes, but NFL Quick Hitters is next, including a trade for a wide receiver that you might want in your fantasy draft. Next year on 101 ESPN. All right, let's dive into some NFL quick hitters alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. Alex, we got an NFL trade earlier today.
Baby, Brandon Ayuk, has he officially been moved?
Nope, still nothing on that front. I saw an update earlier today that was like, hey,
There's
guys,
no update.
The 49ers and Brandon Ayuk still negotiating. They've hit a stalemate, and Steelers are still interested. I was like,
of course they are. Steelers, I'm going to exclusively report this on BK and Ferrario, NFL Insider right here. The Steelers will remain interested in Brandon Ayuk until next offseason when he's a free agent.
Here, I'll report this too exclusively. Brandon Ayuk will play this season for the San Francisco 49ers without a new contract. Okay.
Yeah, man,
I'm glad I got that off my
chest. You've got 2 NFL insiders on your show right now, BK.
Yeah.
Glad we did
how I
that.
said your show because it's his show. We all know.
So the wide receiver that was traded was former first-round pick Jahan Dotson, who was huge for T-Bone's fantasy football team last year. Had a really nice year a couple of seasons ago. Yeah. He was traded along with a 2025 fifth-round pick to the Philadelphia Eagles in exchange for a third-round pick and 2 seventh-round picks. So essentially, Jahan Dotson going to the Eagles for a third-round pick. What do you guys think about this? Is it something that moves the needle at all for the Eagles, in your opinion?
I mean, it should. I mean, they're about as stacked as you can ask offensively. They might be the most elite offense on paper next season in the NFL, having those 3 wide receivers on top of Saquon Barkley and with Dallas Goedert and Jalen Hurts. So, I mean, it should move the needle. Will it? I don't think so because I'm not sold on Philadelphia right now. I think Nick Sirianni is the reason why I'm not sold on that team.
Yeah, this should help them a lot. Like, you look at kind of their receiving yards based on last season. It was Brown, Devontae Smith, and then there's like no second wide receiver that's close. I mean, they were even going with the corpse of Julio Jones last year. So, you're right. They have some of the best talent across the NFL. It's just a matter if Nick Sirianni can get that flower to grow and blossom.
It's hard, man.
But I know. I do like this trade. I think Dotson, again, he's like a perfect guy fantasy-wise. Store on your bench. Have him there for like when you need him for when a guy's either injured or if he's on the bye. I love this trade for the Eagles. Kind of starts to open up. You can go better and feel more comfortable in 3 wide receiver sets.
I like it as well. I think it's a really smart move by them. I'll be curious to see how much, like, does he have better or similar numbers to what he did last year, for example? About 500 yards, 5 to 7 touchdowns over the last couple of seasons. That feels about right for what you'd expect out of a number 3 wide receiver in that offense. So if you're playing in a deep fantasy league, I would still keep Jahan Dotson's name on top of mine. He could still have a pretty decent season for them. All right. ESPN.com put out a piece earlier today on the top coaching staffs across the league. They ranked not just the head coach, but overall who has the best coaching staffs in the NFL. I'm going to read you off this top 5. You guys tell me if there are any places that you like significantly agree, disagree with. Number 1, Kansas City Chiefs, obviously. Come on. Andy Reid,
think their team's trash.
Matt Nagy, Steve Spagnuolo, number 1 coaching staff in the NFL right now. At number 2, Detroit Lions.
Yep, I agree with that.
Number 3, T-Bone's LA Rams. Number 4, the San Francisco 49ers. They do not have an offensive coordinator, and they have a defensive coordinator that nobody really knows if he's going to be good or not. But Kyle Shanahan's so damn good, they don't care. The guy makes up for everything else.
That's kind of the Rams one, too.
And at number 5, they have the Baltimore Ravens with John Harbaugh, Todd Monken, and Zach Orr, who is their new defensive coordinator. Do you guys see anybody that should have been in the top 5 that wasn't included in it, or anything in particular about that top 5 that stands out for you?
I mean, I don't know if the Ravens, I don't have a team that would be above the Ravens, but the Ravens, like, Harbaugh is, of course, incredible. I'm not sold on Todd Monken after last year. They made it seem like this dude was going to, like, reinvent the wheel in terms of offense, and their offense wasn't anything spectacular. But the thing about it is I don't know who I would put above them. I think by the end of this season, DeMeco Ryans' staff is going to be in the top 5
they were
with
at
Houston.
Number 6.
Yeah, I think they would be the one that I would say by the end of this season, I could put them above the Baltimore Ravens. But I liked the top 4.
Yeah, the one that I just don't agree with is Baltimore. I would bump them out of the top 5. I would shuffle the top 4 a little bit. Like, I would put San Fran at 2. I don't care what their defensive coordinator is. Kyle Shanahan's unbelievable. I would have McVay at 3, and then I would have the Lions at 4. But my 5th one for me, and look, maybe I'm buying a little too much into just his success looking at his record, but it's Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Wow.
I mean, if he can finish above 500 with Kyle Rudolph and a bunch of just nobodies at the quarterback position, that guy deserves to be in the top 5 for me. And look, I understand, like, Arthur Smith had his welts in Atlanta, and he's the offensive coordinator there. I think he's now being set up potentially a little bit better to even maximize a Justin Fields if they end up going that route and starting him. He's got a quarterback now, potentially. You know, as much as everybody wants to point to, well, look at it, he didn't get the best out of the weapons in Atlanta, Arthur Smith. Well, yeah, he had Desmond Ritter's quarterback. I could have told you that was going to happen. So I would put the Steelers at 5 for me.
One coaching staff that I think I'm probably higher on than most seem to be is the Minnesota Vikings. Top 5 feels aggressive, but they're 10th on this list. I would probably have them above that. Brian Flores, for all of the faults, and he has plenty of them. We just heard about that with Tua comments that came out this week. He's a really good defensive line, man. I think he's going to do a good job with that defense in Minnesota. And I think Kevin O'Connell is top 7-ish offensive mind in the NFL right now, probably, especially after what we saw. That Minnesota offense was competent last season, despite not having Kirk Cousins for the vast majority of the year. That's pretty impressive work by Kevin O'Connell. They had like 3 or 4 different quarterbacks that were starting for them. So I'd have the Minnesota Vikings a little bit higher than they are on this list. The other team that I would have way higher than what they have on here is the Arizona Cardinals. I did not expect to like Jonathan Gannon. I didn't like his defense that he had in Philadelphia. When I first saw the pew, pew, pew explosives comment from him with Ronald Moore, or who was it?
Christian?
Ronald Moore? The wide receiver.
Isn't it Ronald Moore?
Is it? I don't think
it
for some
is.
reason I was like Ronaldo.
No,
Ronald
Ronaldo's a soccer
Moore?
player.
Jonathan Gannon, I didn't expect to like. I thought they did a really good job last year, man. That defense was interesting with what they were trying to do, even if they weren't particularly effective in doing so. And I thought the offense got a lot more out of it than what I was expecting, given what their talent was. I think Arizona might be pretty frisky this year. I don't know if they're going to have like a winning record or anything, but they might be better than people expect. So that would be another coaching staff that, like, they have them behind the Jaguars, for example. No chance I'm putting them behind Jacksonville.
Yeah, the one that, to me, that I was like, okay, that feels a little low still is Indy was for me. They were at 11. I could see where you look at them as kind of top 10, but again, you didn't really get to see the full kind of mind of Shane Steichen last year because they were hurt with Anthony Richardson. He missed a ton of time. That was the one to me that I was like, oh, I'm a little surprised they're that low. And same with Zach Taylor and the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, I understand last year was a weird year, but we've seen Zach Taylor, when that roster is healthy, do a pretty good job of coaching them and getting them through the playoffs. And, by the way, beating Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs.
Rondale Moore.
You were right. You should have just said R. Moore. Like Madden does, you know?
Kara has a fantasy football team, and so for her, all of the names that she knows in the NFL were on her fantasy team. And it's based on the first initial and then last name. So it's J. Allen for Josh Allen.
Well, I mean, in Kara's defense, that could be confusing. There's 2 Josh Allens in the NFL. She could think it's the linebacker.
So that's the way that she knows who some of the players are across the league. Worst coaching staffs in the league, according to this piece for ESPN.com.
Panthers need to be the worst.
They're down there. They are not as low as I anticipated. The Panthers are at 27. They have a new staff this year. 32. Las Vegas Raiders.
They have a new staff.
31. Correct.
And their coach won more last year than the Carolina Panthers did.
Correct. 31, Washington Commanders. 30, New England Patriots.
That one I could agree with.
29 should be lower. This should be 32. The New Orleans Saints.
I'd agree with that.
28, Tennessee Titans. 27, Panthers. 26, Seattle Seahawks. And 25, Chicago Bears.
And I apologize if you guys were talking about this. I completely blanked out there for a couple of seconds. Where was Jacksonville?
Jacksonville's at 17.
That's trash. Jacksonville should be in the bottom 10.
18.
They should be in the bottom 10.
Yeah. They have the Chargers at number 17. That's another one that I would probably have higher. I just think Jim Harbaugh is a really good head coach. Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of Greg Roman as an offensive coordinator, but Jesse Minter did an excellent job at Michigan. He previously worked with the Ravens as well in the NFL. Jim Harbaugh's an excellent head coach. Wherever he's been, he's had success. Putting him behind the Dallas Cowboys, for example, nonsense. In no way, shape, or form am I ranking Mike McCarthy, regardless of what his staff looks like, ahead of Jim Harbaugh on any list. Yeah. Unless it's the worst coaches in the league. Yeah, that's the only way he gets ahead of Jim
McCarthy
Harbaugh.
Is trash.
It's crazy.
That's fair.
Just like Doug Peterson is also trash.
I'm a little surprised the Bears were as low as they were. Like, I would have thought they'd be top 20 because, like, I was actually impressed with what Eberflus did. And hopefully this defensive coordinator is not having his house searched by the FBI like the last year's was.
Oh.
But I
think that was like the running backs coach or something. It wasn't the OC.
Oh, I thought it was the DC that was the one who got in trouble for it. But either way, like, Matt Eberflus, like, he's been competitive still with Justin Fields. They just go through weird spurts. They're almost like the Nolan Gorman of football, where they play like 3 great games. And you're like, okay, maybe Justin Fields is the guy. And then you watch 3 other games. You're like, oh my God, just trade him. This is terrible.
And now he's a starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
That T-Bone believes in.
With Alex and T-Bone on BK. Coming up next, have the Blues improved their secondary scoring enough going into this season? And if so, what does that mean for them? We'll talk about it next here on 101 ESPN. With Alex Ferrario, I'm Brandon Kiley to tell you about our friends over at Circa Sports in Illinois. Alex, people should already have the app downloaded today, and if you do, you're seeing there are just better odds over there. For example, if you want to bet on somebody to win the Super Bowl this year, the place to do it is over on Circa. I've got 4 potential bets for you, Alex. All of these coming out of the AFC. Ravens plus 1150 over on Circa. Plus 1,000 over on FanDuel. Bills 16-1 on Circa, 15-1 over on FanDuel. Jets 20-1 on Circa, 18-1 on FanDuel. And finally, you know this, my Colts 75-1 over on Circa, 55-1 on FanDuel. There's a reason why we're betting with Circa, and it's because they've got the best app, best odds possible.
Yeah, and this is why I'm so pumped up for the NFL season with Circa Sports, because the Ferrario parlays are officially back, and I'm throwing as much money into those as possible because of those tight money line splits, but also because they're not limiting you based off of their winnings. Plus, you hear me talk about the customer service with Circa. What I love about it is you're always speaking to a person. It's like you're speaking with somebody that works at the Circa Sports Resort in Las Vegas. So make sure you download the app today. Do all of those Ferrario parlays this football season over on the Circa Sports Illinois app. If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
Terry Hendricks, New York Day Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Cardinals beat the Brewers yesterday 10-6. Rubber match of the three-game set is this afternoon. 1:15 will be first pitch. Freddie Peralta will be on the mound for Milwaukee. Miles Michaelis will get the start for St. Louis. The Sports Center update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
The Blues finished tied for 25th last year in goals scored overall in the season, Alex. And they have replaced a decent portion of their bottom six. If you look at it, Kevin Hayes, Nathan Walker, Kasperi Kapanen, Simi Blais, those four players combined last season for 27 goals, and they were primarily playing in your bottom six last year. Woof. They have been replaced now with Holloway, Joseph, Texier, and Foxa. And those guys combined last season for 36 goals in effectively the same number of games played as the four guys that I mentioned previously, Hayes, Blais, Kapanen, and Walker. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Alex, I think a big topic of conversation going into this season is going to be the depth that the Blues have been able to develop. Last year, you were so top-heavy. It was reliance on Kyrou, Booch, Neighbors, Thomas, Saad, Shin, those top six players, will they score for you? Because if the answer is no, you're probably not scoring much in this game. And those were your 6 20-goal scorers. Toropchenko finished with 14. Hayes finished with 13. No other Blues forward on the roster finished with more than 7 goals on the season last year. Do you think they've done enough to fix that? Because it was one of the biggest issues last year, the depth of scoring that they had a year ago.
Yes, I do think they've done enough to fix that, because now you have competent bottom six forwards who know their role and play it to their ability and have had success with it. Like, I look at Matthew Joseph and Alexander Texier. Those are two guys that have been fourth-line players, and last season both scored 10 or more goals, if not got close to it. I think Texier was like 6 or 7 if he wasn't in double digits. But then you bring in a Radek Foxa, who has spent his entire career as a fourth-line forward, and at times he has scored double digits in goals. So, and it's not just the goals, it's playing the style that a bottom six line needs to play, because that's how you create offensive opportunities. You outcompete the other line combination that also is a third or a fourth line, and you do that from the ability to grind and the ability to get to the front of the net. But like, if I look through this, and just like in my hypothetical world, what you've done to improve your depth is you've pushed guys down that are probably playing on your third line or fourth line that last season were playing on your second or third line. So, like, I look at this, and in an ideal world, Brandon Saad is playing on my third line next season. And Brandon Saad, we all know, is a 20-goal scorer. But the reason he's pushed down to that is because of Dylan Holloway possibly emerges in your top six, so Saad can add that depth, which means you might be pushing down an Alexei Toropchenko, who scored 14 goals for you last season, playing in a third-line role. And that is on a fourth-line role for you. So, is it going to set the world on fire? Is it going to make you one of the best teams in the Western Conference? No, you're nowhere near 2019 where death by 1,000 cuts. But what you are is, when you throw your third line out there, in my perfect world, I have Saad, Dvorsky, and Texier as a third line. When you throw that out there, it is not a liability offensively or defensively like Kevin Hayes, Kasperi Kapanen, and Jakub Vrana were last season for the Blues.
Yeah, I do think the bottom six is going to be better defensively, which will help the Blues in the long run next year. But I still just worry that they don't have enough depth of scoring. And the reason I worry about that is I think you can get away with having a bottom six that could end up being fairly good defensively, but isn't putting up a ton of points and not having a ton of goal production. But you got to have an elite power play to make up for that. And that's where I look at it when you're looking at the Blues in kind of the microcosm of just this season and not looking in the long-term picture. I don't know if they've got enough depth of scoring to help out to make up for the lack of a power play that they're not going to have. And that's why when I've said, like, do I think the Blues are a better team on paper than they were a year ago? Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I also think they're going to end up with fewer points than they did a year ago because the West has gotten better around them, and I don't know that they've improved significantly enough to make up for the lack of a power play and for what the rest of the Western Conference has done around them.
And Alex, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. I don't think they've really done anything to improve their power play necessarily this offseason.
No.
Yeah,
I mean, I'll be curious to find out where Dylan Holloway plays on that, if he's on a number 1 unit or number 2 unit. I think, if anything, you've made your second unit more useful, but you didn't do anything to fix your number 1 unit. In fact, your number 1 unit might have gotten a little worse depending on who the power play quarterback is.
That's what I was thinking, because, like, Joseph has 1 career power play goal. Texier, 0 career power play goals. Foxa has 6, but I think it's more in the capacity of, like, an Oscar Sundquist, where he's sitting at the front of the net and he just happens to, his ass puts a puck in the back of the net on accident.
I didn't know where you were going.
I almost said the exact same thing.
So like, I'm looking at this right here. So your first power play unit
hits him and it deflects and he's like, boom.
Those are people have made NHL careers off of pucks going off of their asses. And
Fox a goal.
And there's one thing I know, Joey Vitale tells us all the time. That's why hockey players have great rear ends, because they got to score goals. Daily faceoff, the line combinations at the end of the season last year. Your first unit was Neighbors, Buchnevich, Kyrou, Thomas, Falk. Honestly, that's what I feel like your first unit's going to be next season. Your second unit was Saad, Shen. It was... Jesus, Kapanen was on your power play unit at the end of the season last year. Scott Perunovich and Colton Parayko. Like, so your second power play unit are going to be...
I bet you Broberg takes that Parayko spot.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think you're using 2 defensemen on that. You're using a Dylan Holloway. You're probably still using Braden Shen, Brandon Saad, but you're going to put a Dylan, or you're going to put Broberg on there. And then you're probably going to have like a guy like Texier. And then depending on who else makes the roster, is it significantly better? No, but power play teams that don't have like the Dreisaitl's and the McDavids of having a top power play unit, they're tough to play against because they got 2 units that can score. And last season, you had 1 unit that could barely score. The second unit went on the ice.
You had no units that could score, let's be honest.
Well, the second unit went on the ice last season to give the first unit 30 seconds to breathe so they can go back out there and try and score again. So, and in all fairness, last season, the power play quarterbacks on both of your units were afraid to shoot the puck.
This has been a team that's failed at 5-on-5 for like 3 years now. Even when they were good a few years ago, it was mostly
ugly.
Like, hey, the power play is going to help us overcome the fact that we're just buying time at 5-on-5. And that's why I point to this depth of scoring, because I think that could be something that changes a bit this year. I'm not sure they'll be good at 5-on-5. A lot of that is determined by your top 6, and we'll see what that ends up looking like. I think I'm not sure they have a number 2 center, so that seems kind of important in your top 6. But like Joseph, Texier, Foxa, Holloway, those guys could go a long way in helping you look a little different at 5-on-5 with the bottom 6 guys on the ice. And they're going to be playing 20 minutes a night on average at 5-on-5. Those 4 guys combined with the bottom 2 lines, that's meaningful minutes. That you have those guys in there instead of Hayes, Walker, Kapanen, and Blais, who basically drove 0 offense for any of them at 5-on-5. Walker, maybe it's unfair to include him. I feel like he was the one that maybe drove more offense than the others, but he's literally being replaced by these guys while still being on the roster, which tells you what they think of him comparatively to the guys that they've been able to bring in. So did they put themselves in a place where I think they're going to be now like carried by their bottom 6? In no way, shape, or form do I believe that. Do I think they've improved it, though? And so their floor of what they're going to be scoring on a night-in, night-out basis is going to be better this year than it was a year ago? That I do very much believe, and I think it will help to avoid some of the scoring droughts that they had last year and really over the last couple of seasons.
Well, and the one thing with the bottom 6 forward groups, typically what you want in those guys is you want them to at least set your top 2 lines up for success in terms of have the puck in the offensive zone, cycle the puck, keep it alive so that the fresh guys can come over the boards and capitalize on a worn down team. Last year, think about it. Who of those guys we mentioned in your bottom six were keeping plays alive in the offensive zone? In fact, multiple guys were defensive liabilities for you. And Kevin Hayes for how slow he was in terms of Verana and the turnovers, and Kapanen who just could not sustain any puck battle wins along the boards. And now you're talking about a Matthew Joseph who won a Stanley Cup playing on a fourth line. You're talking about Foxa, who's been to 2 Stanley Cup finals as a fourth line centerman, and bringing in a Texier and potentially having guys like Holloway, Toropchenko, Saad doing that for you. So is it going to score you another 50 goals this season? Absolutely not. Is it going to allow the opportunity for Pavel Buchnevich, Jordan Kyrou to get to potentially 40 goals? I do believe that's possible.
Coming up next, there's a new sports TV station in town. We'll tell you a little bit about it, and there's some tinfoil theories on what it could mean down the road for some of the local teams. Next, you're on 101 ESPN. With Alex and T-Bone on BK. So there's something that was announced earlier today that I want to get your guys' thoughts on. New sports television station that is now going to be in town. Channel 32 is partnering with Channel 4 KMOV. Right now, they have announced pre- and post-game shows for Mizzou games. That's going to be their big thing. And during the week, they'll have Good Morning Football in the station. That's kind of the stalwarts that are going to be a part of the station.
So this is BK jockeying for one of those jobs.
Of course.
Cool. Okay.
They've got Justin Gage as a part of their pre- and post-game show. They probably need somebody to host it with him.
T-Bone would make a lot of sense.
For a small fee.
Sure, me too.
This is how he buys people beers at Ballpark Village for BK and Ferrario night.
Yeah, you are going to need a second job if you're paying for a bunch of beers.
Just announced earlier today. You can find me. I'm writing for the Alton Telegraph now.
Oh, you're going to need a third job.
Absolutely. All right, one weekly column if you want to check that out. The Alton Telegraph is where you can go to find out. I wrote about the expectations and why there's finally some Mizzou optimism.
That's why we're doing this segment here. This is totally trying to get another job. Sure.
So the reason I bring this up, Alex, is because I will be very curious what this means long term. You don't just make this station for Mizzou pre- and post game. Now, that's going to be a part of it, of course, but we know what the Bally Sports situation is right now. There's a lot of uncertainty long term about what that's going to lead to. Do you think there's a chance that the Cardinals and or the Blues eventually are playing games on Channel 32?
Yeah, and I would say I think it's possible for Blues before Cardinals because, like, I think the Blues have done this before. Cardinals did this before as well, but I think the Blues have done it more recently to where they were like playing on Channel 11 for a lot of those games for St. Louis Blues hockey. Like, and by no means am I like reporting on anything. This is purely speculation, but like, it feels more like the Blues would take advantage of something like this than the Cardinals just because Major League Baseball seems like it's just such a bigger entity and so difficult to navigate those waters to whereas I think the Blues already have the setup to where it would be like, yeah, if we want to go this route. What's interesting about the NHL, though, is you're seeing a lot more teams turn into simulcast and start doing their own stream on their website or through their app. Like, I think the LA Kings are doing this. I know the Buffalo Sabres do this. There are a lot of NHL teams that just say, let's package this together and go through our own app so people can watch it.
Yeah, I think there's a chance that you could see. I would agree. Probably the Blues would be the first one to go towards this channel. I think it would be best case scenario for the Cardinals to do it as well. I think Major League Baseball is kind of kidding themselves on selling all their local teams in a package. They're having a tough time getting the Sunday Night Baseball package sold for the upcoming deal. ESPN's been reported that they're going to opt out of it. So I would look at it and say, yeah, I think it's very, I don't know if I'd say very likely, but it feels possible. And you're right. You don't just kind of make this move and go, this is for Missouri Tiger football. This is a long-term plan if you're going to start this up for what I would assume would be Blues or Cardinals or both.
You're getting yourself ready, and this is essentially an audition for, we can do this. Look at what we can produce. Look at what we did with the Missouri Tigers pre- and post-game show. I'm sure eventually there will be some other live events that are available over there. I think this weekend, or tonight actually, the Chiefs game is going to be played on Channel 32 because of the DNC airing live on KMOV. So if you're a Chiefs fan and you want to watch the third preseason game, don't. It's not worth your time. You can check that out over on this new channel that exists in town.
This is how you try and get this job, isn't it?
Well, that was a terrible sales pitch. You said not to watch the station.
Oh, God, yeah. You're awful at this.
I could have done better than that.
T-Bone, cut that and send it to him now.
There will be Blues games on this station eventually. That's pure speculation, not informed at all, but I have to imagine if you're building something like this, you're constructing something like this, you're doing so with a thought in mind of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road, we're going to be the home of the Blues on television.
Yeah.
That should be what they're like. If I was talking to anybody involved with it, that would be my hope.
Yeah,
we're the home of the Blues.
You show the success in one season of college football for a team that, by the way, is expected to bring in a lot of people's attention, and then you take that to the other teams and say, you want a part of this before it goes big? Capitalize on an opportunity in front of you. Absolutely.
Yeah. And eventually, I would have to imagine Cardinals would be part of the goal as well. That, I think, is going to be harder because of what you said, Alex. I think Major League Baseball is seemingly kind of taking the lead on a lot of this stuff. And so there's probably going to be some restrictions on what you can and cannot do and whatever the next version of TV rights deals are in Major League Baseball.
Yeah. The hard part, though, is both teams, when it gets to this point, are going to want all control of what takes place.
Absolutely.
And if you're with a television station, obviously
I
there's...
do wonder, though, if there's some value if you're one of these teams and just saying, like, hey, Channel 32, you get all of the over-the-air production. We get the digital rights.
Yeah.
And we get to make our own app, and we get to be the ones that are in charge of anybody that is watching this, not on, like, traditional cable television. We get that.
Yeah.
And you guys get everything that goes over the traditional TV set. I think that's probably where this eventually goes. Like right now, it's Bally has everything, right? Yeah. The TV rights and the digital rights. So if you're streaming, you're going through the Bally Sports app. If you're watching on television, you're watching through Bally Sports Midwest. I would guess if you're the Blues or the Cardinals, you would want those rights to be split up down the road to where you can have the digital stuff, because that's where a lot of stuff is going eventually anyways. He's Alex, that's T-Bone, I'm BK. Coming up in about 15 minutes or so, we'll play a game of Believe It or Not. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Believe It or Not. But next, do you feel better about Nolan Arenado's outlook if he continues to finish this season strong? Or are you just hoping that somebody else around Major League Baseball feels better about Nolan Arenado because he finishes the season strong? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN. With Alex and T-Bone on BK, so Nolan Arenado walked it off yesterday with a grand slam to give the Cardinals a victory. And Nolan Arenado has quietly been a lot better since the All-Star break. His second half numbers, Alex, are basically Nolan Arenado-y. Like, it's not perfect, but it's getting closer to what you would have expected. Since the All-Star break, it's 30 games now, about 100 at-bats. 275 batting average, 335 on-base percentage, and a slugging percentage that is 100 points higher than what it was in the first half, 486. That's good for an OPS plus of 124. For context, Nolan Arenado last year had an OPS plus of 107. His first year here in St. Louis was basically the numbers that I just read you, an OPS plus of 119. So second half of the season, he's been himself. Not MVP version of himself, but the guy that you thought that you were going to be trading for. Alex, if that continues, does it give you hope that, hey, maybe he was just hurt in the first half and weird first half of the season, that happens. He's fixed. He's back to being the Nolan Arenado that we expected him to be, and that's going to be the case next year. How do you view it?
I mean, yes, it does give me optimism of like, okay, cool, maybe something was just wrong with Nolan Arenado this year, and you hope that going into next season he's back to himself for a full year, because then this team actually can be competitive to have a big bat like that. But I find myself kind of in between that and wishing that he's great so another team would take him. Like, I find myself in the middle of like, look, I want this guy to be great consistently because that's why you traded for him. You traded for him because he was supposed to fill the hole as the third baseman and the cleanup hitter that this team has been desperately searching for a long time. But I just don't believe it, because it's hard for me to say that this guy was hurt and that's why all of a sudden he's done great, when he's been bad, not just for this season, but last season he was not great either for you. And I can't look at this and say he's just been hurt for a year and a half. I'd be concerned that, yes, there might have been an injury a part of it, but frustration takes over more than anything. And you're talking about a guy who just couldn't figure it out, kept getting frustrated and put himself in a bad spot. And then, oh, by the way, we also have the whole off-field stuff of like, where is Nolan Arenado at with this team and how things are meshing overall. So I want him to be great. I'd love, depending on where this team is at moving forward, if a team would say, let's take on that money so that the Cardinals can kind of reset. So I find myself in the middle of like, I don't know what to do with Nolan Arenado.
I find myself, and I hope he has success, but I find myself saying, you know, I hope he has success because so it opens up the possibility to move on from him in the offseason. Because I think when you look at the Nolan Arenado era in St. Louis, just focusing on his play, I'd say it's been disappointing. There's really been only the 1 year where he was actual Nolan Arenado, the guy you thought you were getting from the Colorado Rockies. That first year, he was good, but 19% above league average, that wasn't what you were expecting. You were expecting a little bit more from Nolan Arenado. Last year, 7% above league average, and this year at the 4% above league average. And when I look at where this team is at, we've talked about it, they're stuck right now. They feel like a team that should be kind of pivoting towards a youth movement going into the offseason. So it makes me say, well, how do you get towards that youth movement? Well, it's trading Nolan Arenado. And, you know, if he plays well down the stretch and you can look at him and go, okay, maybe there was something that was just off early on in the year. You now have the possibility to look at potentially trading him and not eating a ton of money from it. You probably still have to eat some money because he is making $32 million, but it's not as much, you know, potentially. So I find myself kind of almost rooting for it as, you know what, I hope it just creates an opportunity that they can explore to potentially move him in the offseason.
That's where I'm at as well. I wanted so badly for this to be everything that everybody hoped that it was going to be, man. Because Arenado was the great white buffalo for Cardinals fans. Like, this was the guy. Think about how long we had been talking about him here in St. Louis as, dude, just acquire Nolan. Like, if they get Arenado, imagine what that could do to unlock the rest of this roster. And the truth is, it hasn't amounted to what all of us were hoping that it could be. It's been underwhelming, even if not like a total failure, because he did have an MVP caliber season here in St. Louis. You can't write that off. But otherwise, it's been underwhelming for the most part. And a lot of that is because of the team around him. I think that's fair. But some of it has been Arenado himself. The last 2 years, Alex, you mentioned it, he just has not performed the way that you expected him to. And so I'm not believing this as well, because the numbers indicate that it's more fluky than anything else. So prior to the 4th of July, that's kind of the line of demarcation. He had that 4-hit game on the 5th of July, and then since then he's been better. Prior to that, he was not very good. He was batting .256 and had a slugging percentage of .367 at that point in time, 4th of July. His expected numbers on the 4th of July, .250 and an expected slugging percentage of .350. At that point in the season, he had 8 barrels, and his average exit velo was about 85 miles per hour, all right? Since then, expected batting average of .270, so slightly up. Expected slugging percentage of about .400, so slightly up. But those are way off from what his current actual numbers are. Expected batting average of .270, actual batting average of .300. Expected slugging percentage of .400, actual slugging percentage of .485. A lot of what you're seeing, and I don't like saying this, but it's the truth, is some batted ball luck. He got a little unlucky earlier in the season, and he's getting a little luckier in the second half of the season. It comes out in the wash, and he's been roughly a league average hitter on the year. And so am I overly excited for what Arenado has done? And is it getting me super excited about what it's going to be next year? Not at all, man. Not at all. It's more of a, I hope somebody else falls in love with the actual numbers and some of the like traditional metrics that you see from him in the second half. So that way they're willing to take on the contract and the Cardinals can say, you know what? We got 4 years out of it. It wasn't what we anticipated. Let's go ahead and move on and go with more of a youth movement. That's where I'm at. I don't love saying it, but I think it's true.
I think the bigger question with that move is if that does come to play, you're asking yourself, who's your third baseman moving forward? Because I don't believe Nolan Gorman is it. I don't know if Nolan Gorman's a part of this team's future. Are you going to move Jordan Walker to third base?
No. If I'm being honest, like, I don't even care. You know, and what I mean by that is, okay, well, then go sign a guy that can play third base for like $5 million.
I'm with you. You're just back into the same spot that you used to be to where it was who's your third baseman.
But like, I'm not worried about it long term because I'm trying to figure out what the core is of the Cardinals.
I think it's Nolan Gorman, by the way. I don't think I'm out on Nolan Gorman.
I'm not either, but I'm not saying like, I wouldn't say like even if you were out on Nolan Gorman, like say the Cardinals were out on Nolan Gorman,
long term.
Sure. Like I'm not worried about that one position in the long term. Their biggest issues, they've got to figure out who the core is of the Cardinals. Like if I said today that, okay, at the end of the season, they trade Nolan Arenado, Paul Goldschmidt's gone, and I don't know, trade, Matz doesn't even count, but trade another guy. Who's the core of the Cardinals in the long run? Like the thought is Mason Wynn, Alec Burleson, but as we've seen from the Cardinals history, we've seen a lot of prospects come up and flame out in year 2, you know? So I think the bigger concern isn't so much of like, oh, what's our third baseman for the next 5 to 7 years? No, it's figured out who's the next core that you're building around for the next 5 to 7 years. That's the bigger concern, not just one position. That's why whether it be Gorman or you go sign a guy on a minor league deal or you go and take on a bad contract, even in return maybe, and try and have him play third base.
So somebody on the YouTube chat, 89 Blue, said, who's your third baseman who's better than Nolan or the same as Nolan for lesser money? You can't just trade him without knowing what the alternative is going to be. You complain about viewers doing that all day, but you're doing that as well. I'm not. What I'm saying is go full youth movement. I'm not saying that you go out there and replace Nolan Arenado. I'm telling you it's time for the Cardinals to take a step back and to take a deep breath and say, we're not competing next year for a championship. It's just not happening. And they might end up being better than they anticipate. This happens sometimes, right? Where you take a step back and you let the young guys play, and then you go into the season and you anticipate, okay, we're going to be like a 80-win team this year. And then suddenly it all comes together and you're like, whoa, okay, let's make some moves at the deadline. Let's start to really build onto this. This is basically what happened with, not to the same degree, it was for different reasons, but the Orioles last year, where they were a year ahead of time, right? Or 2 years ago, maybe. They were a year ahead of time. And the Reds a couple of years ago, I think, had that. The Pirates this year were kind of that, honestly, for a little while. And it comes together, and you're like, okay, do we add? Like, what do we do now? I don't think that's going to happen for the Cardinals, but it's in the range of outcomes. The important part, though, is you take a deep breath, and you don't go out and sign a Kyle Gibson or a Lance Lynn, or you don't bring in Nolan Arenado. You don't re-sign Paul Goldschmidt. You just say, we're going to go with the young guys and give them an opportunity. So to Alex's question of who's playing third base for you next year, for me, it would probably be Nolan Gorman. At second base, I'm probably playing Brendan Donovan. I'm seeing what these outfielders look like, so that way Brendan Donovan isn't playing out there every day next season. Let's find out once and for all what Lars Nootbaar is going to be for you. Let's find out what Jordan Walker looks like with a full runway of a season in the outfield for him. Let's find out what Alec Burleson looks like at first base. Hey, do you have Luken Baker? Is there anything there with Luken Baker? Can Thomas Ajayci help you next season? Just give these guys all of the at-bats, every opportunity going to the young guys next season. That would be my way of going about this, because I don't think that there's enough value right now extracted from a $35 million player in Nolan Arenado, and you might have to eat some of that contract. So be it. Save some of the money, get your payroll down a little bit. The Cardinals want to do that anyways, and then my hope would be they reinvest that down the road. They probably won't. They'll just end up saving the money. That's what baseball teams tend to do. But the hope would be they reinvest it down the road, and next year you take it as a, let's get our stuff in order. Yeah. Let's get this stuff figured out, get the development process back on track, and you spend a year of getting the young guys their opportunities that they deserve.
And I'm not opposed to it. I was just asking that question because I think that's what everybody's going to think of. I'm all on board with it because just like I've said with the day-to-day operations of the Cardinals of like, it's not working, so why not try something different? It has not been working since you made the acquisition of both Goldschmidt and Arenado, because you got those guys because you believed you were in win-now mode still, and you had the right group of players to help you win. And you haven't done any winning with those guys. Now it'd be to the point where I'm not in win-now mode. I'm in the let's get back to a window that starts to put us in the win-now mode. And the only way we're going to do that is if we stop relying on certain guys that haven't been able to get us there.
Somebody on the text line said, guys, if the full youth movement is your plan, then you have to trade Wilson and Sonny as well. I don't think you do.
You got to have some type of leaders around at some point to help you get to that point.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like the Sonny side of things, maybe you would prefer to go about it that way. There's still value in Sonny Gray, and if you made him available, you could get a decent return for him. And he's cost you a lot of money over the next 2 years. I think it's 2 years, $60 million that's remaining. So that one I'm at least willing to have the conversation on. I don't think Wilson Contreras you have to trade at all. I think Wilson Contreras is a really good presence inside of that clubhouse, and I do think some teams go too far in that direction. The Cardinals are not in a place where they need to tank, guys. They're not in that spot. The Cardinals are in a place where it would be okay and a bit of a refreshing decision if they decided to take a little bit of a step back and let the young guys play. There's a difference between tearing it down to the studs, which is what teams like the White Sox do and the Orioles did and the Astros did, and having a team that's just playing young guys every day. That's basically what the Pirates are right now.
This would be more a retool than a rebuild. Yeah. Make sure you still have some veterans there. Yeah, exactly. And I'm with you, BK. I think teams both tend to lean more towards that rebuild and tear it too much down to the studs. But I also think those teams that kind of view themselves as up and coming at times don't bring in enough veterans as well.
Totally agree.
Because what's the reason for veterans? And look, I am a big skeptic of like the whole leadership thing. I don't think you win and lose because of leadership. I do think it does have a role in the locker room, and especially for young teams, because once you start going through losing streaks, you know who's been through those before and knows how to help you get out of it and help you in some of the down times? The guys that have been there before and the veterans. That's where I think it matters. I don't think the Cardinals' idea of this whole like veteran presence, that's the whole reason we lost 91 games last year. No, you lost 91 games last year because you had no talent. Yep. Why are you losing this year? Not enough talent.
That's the most important. I always go back to a comment that Marty St. Louis had about Jake Allen. I think it was a year or two ago about why re-signing him. And they said, the reason we re-signed this guy is because we have a group of guys that don't know how to lose. And at some point, these guys have to learn what losing looks like and how to stop losing. And that's what veterans are needed for.
Somebody else on the text line said, BK, the Royals tore it all down as well. Don't be biased again. First of all, no, they didn't. They kept Salvador Perez in place.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to point to like a one-to-one comparison for the Contreras point, that would be the difference there. The other thing is, the Royals failed for 15 years to be able to figure this out. They tore it down and then built it up and then tore it down and built it up like 3 different times before finally they hit the right core in place. And I think part of that was because they didn't have the guys. They didn't have guys like Wilson Contreras and Sonny Gray. Like, there is value in those guys being able to show young guys the ropes. I'm not sure the value necessarily, the Cardinals will tell you otherwise, but do they need a full season of Brandon Crawford for like Brendan Donovan? I don't know. Brendan Donovan's like 28 years old. He's considered to be one of the leaders in this clubhouse right now. But I do think there's value in having a Wilson Contreras and a Brendan Donovan in place and a Sonny Gray in place. I think sometimes these teams, it ends up being the Philadelphia 76ers of the tank mode era, where they just exclusively have 22-year-olds. That's not great for anybody. You do need some adults in the room occasionally to just be like, hey, we're in Milwaukee. Here are the places that you go to eat. I know that sounds so unbelievably silly, but like just being a pro, there is some learned experiences that come along the way. Cardinals have some guys inside of that clubhouse right now that you don't necessarily have to have to change all of that to be able to go in this direction. All right, coming up in about 15 minutes or so, college coaches gave their unfiltered thoughts on the top college football quarterbacks across the country, including our own right here in Missouri. We'll talk about that coming up in 15 minutes. Believe it or not, it's next here on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friends at Rhino Shield. Darren and his team taking care and making your house look brand new. And maybe it's not your house. Maybe it's your business that needs a new look. But whatever it is, if your exterior looks old, looks worn down, needs a new look, then you need to call Rhino Shield, because what they use is not paint. And why I say that is because you might think, well, I need paint. Sure. But if you just do paint, over-the-counter paint from a hardware store, that is going to deteriorate over time. And you could see some of the incredible work that Darren and his team have done of different houses, different businesses around the Missouri and Illinois area. It gives it a whole new face. And it's a 2 to 3 coating process, a ceramic coating that sticks 8 to 10 times thicker than any other paint that you're going to buy. It's 100% waterproof. It deflects 90% of the UV rays. You can set it and forget it with Rhino Shield. It's been featured on HGTV show multiple times. This Old House. You could see it at the Better Business Bureau. An A+ rating. Give Darren a call today. Tell him Alex Ferrario sent you and get the coating of your Rhino on your exterior. 877-25-RHINO, 877-25-RHINO.com.
All right, sing it, boys.
The gang's together.
That's the only good thing going on in St. Louis.
Whoa.
Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought I could feel so
Free.
We're flying away on a wing and a prayer.
Who could it be?
Believe it or not, it's just me.
Oh, don't ever do that again.
399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Believe It or
You've
Not.
definitely become a dad.
Totally, man. You didn't think you would, but
If you weren't watching YouTube stream, first off, that's a mistake. But second, if you weren't, This was what BK was doing. He's like flapping his arms like a
weirdest
bird
too.
Yeah.
Like what bird does that?
Bird.
What's that bird
Like
from?
a toucan.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah,
With
Fruit
the
Loops.
I couldn't remember the name. I wish I could.
Oh, don't worry, man. I
Was
always
it the beak?
Always got. No, man, it wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't at all.
did it?
It was the majestic colors that you have.
No, it was the beak.
It was the beak. It was the beak.
Sorry, man. I understand.
It's just like you get us off when you do that stuff, man. Not in the good way. No,
Now,
not in the good
why.
way.
Now I'm just picturing him as the bird from Lion King.
What's Fruit Loops' saying? What's the saying for Fruit Loops? Because I keep thinking cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and that's not Fruit Loops.
Do they have a saying?
Do they have a slogan?
I don't think they do. Maybe it's something fruity. I don't think there is a
Something fruity.
Follow your nose.
Follow your nose.
Follow your nose.
Yeah.
Flavor bursting.
Well, no, I prefer follow your nose. Oh man, that's great. I needed a good laugh today. Thanks, boys.
So, time for Believe It or Not here on 101 ESPN.
Follow your nose, BK and Ferrario fans. You'll sniff out the competition.
You done?
He can't think of another one.
I know. He's trying.
He's trying
You
so
can
bad.
see the gears working up there.
Let that hamster run.
Nothing
up
else?
I smell what you're cooking.
All right, guys, believe it or not, Paul Goldschmidt will be back with the Cardinals in 2025 in a player capacity.
I'll say believe it. I just don't think he's going to be the first baseman. I hope he's not the first baseman. I hope he comes back in
Third
What
baseman?
exactly about their handling of Paul Goldschmidt this year?
I'm sorry, is he playing first base today?
You know what?
Sit back down.
I had a tone problem there for a second. I'm going to say that.
Follow
You
your
deserve
nose
that.
back to your corner.
I'll believe it, and here's kind of why. If they want him around as a veteran, I can kind of get it if you platoon him, because he's got to roll. If they're gonna push next year again, like, okay, we agree in this room they should reset, right? All right, now let's do the Cardinal thing and let's actually attempt to build a 80-win team. I can see how they convince themselves of, if we bring back Paul Goldschmidt in a platoon role because Burley can't hit lefties, we have a spot for him on this roster. I can see how they convince themselves of that. It's how they, outside of like, ooh, look at the ticket sales, how they convince themselves of bringing Albert back.
That'll never go away.
He had a role, and it was to hit lefties. Goldie can have that role, but my fear is it's going to become Goldie's back as the everyday first baseman. Believe it.
I'm
Look at
gonna
me with
say
that big
not.
old beak, okay?
I'm going to say not believe it because I think Goldie's going to retire. I think he might know.
I can't blame him for that. For how he sounded this last month, I can't blame him for taking that stance.
It's hard for me to imagine he looks at this and says to himself, I want to do that again. And maybe like, hey, listen, we saw this with Waino, right? Where sometimes guys just, they so badly believe in themselves and they want it so badly that they convince themselves, I'll figure it out. I've done it before, I will figure it out again. So it's possible that that's Paul Goldschmidt's mindset. But I really wonder if he looks back at this season after it's over and says, I think that was it. I don't think I have it in me again.
And he's played, what, 14, 15 seasons? I mean, like, you've had an incredible career. At least in the
14 years.
At least in the Hall of Fame conversation,
I think he's a Hall of Famer.
You've never won a World Series, but I mean, unfortunately for you, unless you pick a team that's willing to take you on, that's got a World Series shot, you're not going to. Even if you go one more year, at this point, I think you go for your mental sanity and your family's mental sanity. Because, like, again, I said it earlier today or yesterday. Like, I take the personal side of it into consideration, and like, I can only put myself in Paul Goldschmidt's shoes. Imagine going home every single night, trying to forget the fact that I was just they walked a hitter to get to me, and then I struck out and the team lost. That would eat at me for the rest of my life.
If you look at where he's at on it's called JAWS, which is like the Hall of Fame monitor statistics, he's pretty clearly a Hall of Famer. He's above right now the likes of Keith Hernandez. He's right in there with like Eddie Murray, Todd Helton, Willie McCovey.
Yeah.
Joey Votto and Paul Goldschmidt, in my opinion, will both eventually be Hall of Famers.
I'm with you.
And I think that there's a decent chance that this was the final year for both of them in Major League Baseball. Alex, what do you got for us?
All right, guys, believe it or not, I don't know if you saw this, but last night NHL Network, they're doing their top 20 list, and they're doing the top 20 centers, and Robert Thomas was listed at 18th. Believe it or not, by the end of this season, Robert Thomas will be top 10 in the NHL centers.
Can you read out the top 10 for us?
So it was
so we know kind of what the company
McDavid,
is.
McKinnon, Matthews, Draisaitl, Barkov, Crosby, Point, Eichel, Jack Hughes, Elias Pettersson.
Eichel, Hughes, and Pettersson is basically the company that he would be keeping.
And these were the guys that were still above him. JT Miller, Sebastian Aho, Connor Bedard, which I just think is stupid that they put him on there already. Rope Hintz, Dylan Larkin, Nick Suzuki, Tim Stützle.
I think that like 8 to 13 range is where he should be.
I do too. And the reason I'm presenting this is because I truly believe he's a 100-point player. Yeah, I believe he's a 100-point player next season. I mean, you're talking about 4 more goals and 10 more assists, which, I mean, 10 more goals for Booch, Neighbors, Jordan Kyrou throughout the season. You put him in 100 points. These are the guys, centers last year, that scored 100 points in the NHL. McKinnon, McDavid, Matthews, Draisaitl, JT Miller, end of list.
I think I would believe this. I could see where I'm kind of with BK. I could see anywhere between that like 8 to 13 range. And if he's got a shot for 8, 9, and 10, then yeah, I'm going to believe this. If he has the same season or improves upon last season, he'll definitely be at least in the conversation, so I'll believe it.
I think he's better than Jack Eichel. That's just, I mean, I know it's a bold take because Eichel's won a Stanley Cup, but Thomas has 2. I think he's better than Jack Eichel.
T-Bone?
Guys, believe it or not, Ryan Helsley will be the Cardinals' closer come opening day of 2025.
I'm going to not believe this. I think if the Cardinals take the approach that we all believe they should, do I think they will? I think that's really going to come down to where Mo is at in his tenure with the Cardinals. I think the first move, if I'm a new GM taking over of this team, is trading Ryan Helsley. And I know you're getting rid of your best asset that can keep you competitive, but I'm also bringing in the most return for a guy that is desirable around the league. And I'll figure out my closing situation moving forward.
I don't know the answer to this question. Would you get more for Ryan Helsley if you trade him in the offseason or at the deadline? You would assume the offseason because you have more time.
I would probably say deadline.
How much did Josh Hader get when he was traded?
He got a pretty decent.
Because he got traded in the offseason, didn't he?
He was at the deadline.
Oh, he was at the deadline? And I mean, I brought up, when we were talking about this about a month ago, I brought up what Aroldis Chapman got going from the Yankees to the Cubs, and that was at the deadline.
Yeah. Well, even look at what Chapman got going to the Rangers from the Royals. I don't know. I would probably say the
it's
deadline,
risky because he needs to be healthy.
And
that's
he
the
has
risk that
And he's got to be good, this good again. And if your team's bad next year, he's not going to be able to showcase it the same way he did this year.
People know, though. People know he's a good closer, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. The big thing is the injury risk. If you decide to take him into the season and he gets hurt, well, now you get nothing in return for him. So I'll say the better or the believe it or not was he will be their closer on opening day of 2025.
Yeah.
I'll believe it because I have not seen this particular front office, and we'll see if there's changes, but I've not seen this particular front office make a move like that very often. But for me on the outside looking in, I think it'd be smart if they decided to trade him in the offseason.
And the one thing I'd worry about waiting to the deadline is there are other closers that are on the market as well. Like this was an offseason to do it because there were no closers being traded to the same ilk of Ryan Helsley. I'd be worried maybe next year there are a couple more guys.
I actually think there's a chance he can be the best closer on the market. Like this year would have been between him and Tanner Scott, that lefty from Miami. I'm not going to believe it because I think you're probably right that this regime, we haven't seen them do that. They should, though, because his value will be high.
If they're doing what we're saying.
If they go to the
that's going to be a different regime.
Because, one, the value is still going to be pretty high. 2, to your point, you kind of avoid the potential of injuries. And 3, I think you said, he's like kind of the identity of their team for their wins and losses. Man, your team must stink if your identity is your closer. So, if that's the case, anybody can close. I know. My point exactly. Closers affect one inning of a game. Now, it's a very important inning, but almost anybody can do it, So I'm more than willing to trade Ryan Helsley this year's offseason if they go youth movement.
All right, we'll get a couple of these. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service X line for Believe It or Not. Guys, believe it or not, the top 9 for the Blues next year will be Thomas, Kyrou, Booch, Shin, Neighbor, Saad, Holloway, Bolduc, Texier. I'm not, because I'm not sure that I'd agree with the Bolduc one. That's the one that I would say is most questionable. The other 8, I think, are definitive, will happen. The Bolduc one is the one that's
funny you ask. I brought out my handy dandy notebook of my line combinations that I've written down. Here's my top 9. Booch, Thomas, Neighbors, Holloway, Shen, Kairu, Saad, Dvorsky, Texier.
So you have Dvorsky.
I have Dvorsky making this team.
It's Bolduc, Dvorsky, and
Joseph.
Or Toropchenko.
Yeah, I think
those are the guys that are probably in play for that final spot in your top 9. I think the other 8 are no doubters.
Yeah.
I'd agree.
Yeah, I think the combination that I wrote down is Bolduc, Texier, Joseph, Toropchenko, and Holloway. Those who are fighting for your top 9 for 2 spots.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service X line from the 314. Guys, the Cardinals, believe it or not, are happy with their young talent and will actually end up spending this offseason, not taking a step back. I think that there's a really good chance that the Cardinals will be taking a step back financially.
Yeah, you're not spending. If you miss the playoffs again, you're not spending next year.
Yeah,
it's hard to justify if you're an owner.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
I'm not going to believe it either. And another thing too, like, even if they were somewhat competitive, like let's say they finish, I don't know, 82 and 82, they go right at 500. Because of their RSN situation, it's clear ownership that really matters to them. They would cut back payroll even if this was a slightly like 500 team. So yeah, I'm not going to believe this, and I definitely don't think they're happy with their young guys. I mean, you don't send Nolan Gorman down if you're not happy with them.
Yeah.
So
coming up next, college coaches gave some unfiltered thoughts on the top college football quarterbacks. We'll tell you what they had to say about Brady Cook next year on 101 ESPN.
Terry Hurst here at the Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Cardinals currently taking on the Milwaukee Brewers. Freddie Peralta's getting the start for Milwaukee. Miles Michaelis is on the mound for St. Louis, and they are currently tied at 0 in the bottom of the second inning. This Sports Center update is brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
So ESPN.com has an article out right now. They talks to coaches from around college football about some of the top quarterbacks in college football. Alex, here's what they had to say about Brady Cook. Quote, Cook blossomed in his second season as the Missouri starter, helping them to win 11 games while throwing touchdown passes in all 13 of his opportunities to do so. He had solid numbers in 2022, but saw significant increase in yards, touchdowns, and yards per attempt last season. The 6'2", 215-pound senior will lead a team with legitimate CFP aspirations in an offense featuring potential award favorite Luther Burden III. The coach that they talked to was an SEC defensive coordinator, and he said the following, quote, he's a really good player, smart, manages it, throws it better than you would expect. I don't think he's an elite player, but he's a really good one, end quote. Alex, that feels about right to me in terms of like the overall assessment of who Brady Cook is at this point in his career. I went on a podcast the other day and they asked me, Brady Cook is a top blank starting quarterback in the SEC. So if you want to be conservative about it, I think top 5 is probably the correct answer to this. But I think top 4 is potentially on the table for Brady Cook. I also don't think there's any scenario where he finishes the year and we look back and say he was the best starting quarterback in the SEC. So I think this is probably the right way to assess it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think going into the season, it's just all about kind of maintaining the level of expectation of Brady Cook. I don't know if there's really a higher ceiling to get to than what you just mentioned of top 4, top 5. Just because of kind of who Brady Cook is, but also with the roster, because it does feel like that if this team's success offensively, there are going to be a lot more people talking about what Luther Burden is doing rather than what Brady Cook is doing, just because it's the highlight reel maker. Sure. It's the guy that, yes, the quarterback's doing it, but Luther Burden's making the rest happen. But I don't think that's a bad thing for Brady Cook. I think it would be problematic if this season was all about Brady Cook is one of the top 2 quarterbacks in all of the SEC.
It's a harder way to win, man.
That puts a lot of expectations on that guy to follow through. And if it doesn't, now you're talking about more issues that lie in the team. I think this is a perfect situation for Mizzou to be in, to have a Brady Cook of people saying like, hey, he's a really good quarterback and that is all he is, because now you can take it to the next level.
If I told you guys nothing else changes. The schedule is the same. The roster is the same. The thing that does change is you have the quarterbacks from last year instead of this year. What I mean by that is like Michael Penix still in college, Bo Nix still in college, Caleb Williams still in college. Those quarterbacks that we saw last year that were all really freaking good, those guys remain, and everything else stays the same. Would you feel differently going into the season about the University of Missouri than you do currently? Because I would.
Well, yeah.
Because I would look around and say to myself, like, Missouri has a pretty significant disadvantage at the quarterback position now compared to what they actually do going into this season. And it's why, like, that's one of the many reasons as to why I'm so optimistic about this year. You go into the year with a guy that is good but not great. And last year, that might have been a death knell for any of the teams that were around college football. Like, you look back on it, the rankings were pretty clear. Hey, these teams have the best quarterbacks in college football right now, and that's why they are where they are. I don't think that's going to be the case in 2024. I think there is more of an opening for a team that gets there in the way that Alabama used to or Georgia used to, where it's about the team, the defense, the running game, the wide receivers, the weapons, everything else, as much as it is the quarterback. And that is the formula for Mizzou, to your point, Alex. It is Luther Burden was amazing. The defense basically was what it was last year, and the running game didn't take a significant step back after Cody Schrader left. I think that's their formula this season.
Yeah, I would agree with that. To your question of, would it be different if you had those other quarterbacks? Yeah, because it's not even so much of Brady Cook and just kind of the level of his game. It's more like their schedule. I think you look at their schedule, 2 losses, you can still look around the country and still say, you know what, they can still make the playoff. I think if you looked at it a couple, like last year, for example, there are so many good teams and so much better. And we saw it. The committee looks at the talent level on a team as well, not just strength of schedule. Sorry, Florida State. Yeah. But I think you're right. And I think when you talk about Brady Cook and kind of like what his ceiling is and does he have to be great for the Tigers to be great, I think there's a chance that that's the scenario. If the running game doesn't happen, if the defense takes a step back, then to me, he's going to have to be arguably a top 10 quarterback in the country probably. But if everything goes right and you kind of set yourself up well, you have more of a game manager to where you never really look at the season and you say Brady Cook won us a football game. He didn't cost us a football game. That's more of Brady Cook.
Top 7 teams last year at the end of season, AP Top 25 poll. Michigan, J.J. McCarthy. Washington, Michael Penix Jr. Texas,
Quinn Ewers.
Every time, man.
Unbelievable.
The
He's like your Ivan
disrespect.
Barbashev.
I'm rooting for Texas now.
Georgia, Carson Beck. Alabama, Milroe. Florida State, Travis. Oregon, Bo Nix. It's the top 7 teams in the country last year. Yep. And you look at it, and like the only quarterbacks that are returning on that list that I just read are the 3 from the SEC, and those are arguably the 3 worst quarterbacks that I read off from that list from last year. So they're in a really good spot in that regard. Last thing that I wanted to get to here, if I told you right now, because there was a prediction that came out the other day from a national analyst, and it had Mizzou going 7-5 this season. 7-5.
Someone's not a Mizzou fan.
I like it.
It's the first time that I've seen anybody predict them for fewer than 8 wins this year. Do you guys see that as being in the range of outcomes? Like, is there a scenario where Missouri wins only 7 games this year without significant injuries?
No.
Because I've got Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vandy, and UMass as guaranteed locked-in wins, and that gets you to 5.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So they would then have to go 2-5 the rest of the way against Texas A&M, Auburn, Bama, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Mississippi State, and Arkansas.
And honestly, I think in a worst-case scenario, you win 3, 4 of those. Like, worst-case scenario, you win 4 of those. So, no, I don't see that being... If that happens, there was either an injury or Eli Drinkwitz had the ultimate combustion with this team this year, and people should be fired up. I just don't see that being the case.
Yeah, I think their floor, worst case scenario, is 8 wins.
That's where I'm at. Barring injury.
Yeah, barring injury. I think worst case scenario, like if the running game they can't really figure out how to replace Cody Schrader. Defense takes a decent step back, and then Brady Cook kind of is what we think of Brady Cook. And again, it's not a shot at Brady Cook, just what it is. I think you probably lose the 3 games that we've talked about on their schedule as being the toughest, the A&M, Bama, and Oklahoma game. And then you're more susceptible to one of those games that you were just kind of mentioning, Auburn, South Carolina, Mississippi State, Arkansas, one of those games potentially being an upset. So I think worst case scenario, it's 8 wins for the Missouri Tigers.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. For what it's worth, there is a bit of news to pass along. SEC related, Luther Burden named as a first-team preseason coaches All-SEC player. Cameron Johnson and Armand Mimbu, the right guard and right tackle, also made the 3rd team for Missouri. The AP one, the press, the media one that came out earlier this year, it was just Luther Burden. There were no other players that made 1st, 2nd, or 3rd team All-SEC preseason. I think they will finish the year with 5 or more on the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd All-SEC teams.
Oh, I thought you were going to say first team. I was like,
oh,
whoa.
No. Let's not be ridiculous.
Relax over there,
I don't know if Illinois is going to have one on the 5th team.
Coming up next, probably not for the SEC.
Maybe
we'll get into the BK and Ferrario Rewind here on 101 ESPN. Alex and T-Bone on BK. If you missed anything from today's show, be sure to check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com, and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
If you go over there after the show today, you'll see our conversation with Kiley McDaniel, ESPN's Major League Baseball insider. He's worked with multiple organizations. He is very good when it comes to player development. He breaks down prospects across the league. He does deep dives on all these guys. I thought he had some really excellent insight into where the Cardinals are at as an organization right now and what can be done to get things back on track, in his opinion. So check that out on the podcast page after the show today. Alex, right now the Cardinals are in action. It's the bottom of the third inning. They do have Victor Scott on second base. There is one out. It is the top of the order that is up right now. Over under 1 run scored in this inning.
Under. I don't think.
Let me say this a different way so that way it's better for the bet. Will the Cardinals score a run in this inning?
No.
No,
really?
It's a Freddie Peralta's on the mound.
And the top of the order, you act like the top of the order is the most dangerous part of this whole order. Right now, the bottom of the order is the most dangerous part of this team. Jose Fermin and Luken Baker and Matt Carpenter are the 3 out of the 4 guys that have pinch hit home runs for you. And we're going to act like the top of the order is dangerous? Come on, man. Come on. Now, if Luken Baker was in the lineup like I would have said, I'd be a little bit more scared.
Over under, they scored 3 runs today.
3?
Yeah.
Under.
Oh, 2.5, sorry.
Come on, man. They're not scoring 4 runs. They did that yesterday, not back to back.
They've exhausted all of their options.
They have hit a pinch hit homer in 3 straight days now.
Yeah, but think of who they are.
I don't care who it is.
Well,
Again, this goes back to our conversation at the beginning of the show. I don't care who's hitting the home runs. I care that they hit them.
This team is going to get to a postseason, and they're going to thank Luken Baker, Jose Fermin, and Matt Carpenter for getting them there.
They're not getting to the postseason.
Yeah,
man.
You're right, buddy. Oh, hey, look, there's that one that's going to move them over.
You're the only one still saying that they're a postseason team.
You're the one that last week said that this feels like 2021.
That was standings based. And you know what? In the last week, that's changed.
They're in the same spot standings based as they were
there's
last
4 teams
time.
ahead of them.
I'm out again tomorrow because I don't work on Fridays anymore.
Or Mondays. What are we doing? Like I had a baby and I was off for a week. This guy just takes Mondays and Fridays off.
He's Alex. That's T-Bone. I'm BK. I'm out tomorrow. I'm out next Thursday and Friday. I'll work Fridays again
What is
eventually.
happening?
I don't work full work weeks. That's not what I'm into here on
God,
BK,
the BK
and Ferrario.
special.
They've got you guys taken care of tomorrow. Enjoy your weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday here on 101 ESPN.